Welcome to the second video in the Advanced Birding video series. Hi, I'm your host John Dunn. This video will be treating some of our most beautiful gulls, the small and medium-sized groups. For convenience, we have divided these gulls into three groups. The second group includes our small gulls, which all share the common characteristic of acquiring a dark hood and alternate plumage. This group consists of the final group includes the black-legged kittiwake, the Bering Sea specialty, the red-legged kittiwake, and those high Arctic species, the Rosses and the ivory gull. As we did with the large gulls, before critically looking at these small gulls, we need to first become familiar with their parts, or their topography. I know this can be a cumbersome subject, one that I did not give enough attention to as a beginning or even an intermediate level birder, but it is simply essential in becoming an experienced gull watcher. Most field guides have moderately detailed generic line illustrations of the parts of the bird. We have again included some here of gulls. Briefly, let's just emphasize the key characters, beginning with the head and working back. Bill shape is often one of the better clues to a gull's identity. One aspect that still influences shape is the angle of the gonies, and whether there is a more conspicuous gonidial angle, as with this Heermann's gull, or whether the lower mandible is more straight, as with this mew gull. However, none of the gulls in this video have as pronounced a gonidial angle as many of the large gulls did. Adults of these small gulls show more variation in bill color, and the size, shape, and amount of curvature can all be important field marks. The iris color, pale or dark, also varies between species, though at least during their first year, all gulls have dark eyes. Some of these small gulls acquire dark hoods and alternate, or breeding plumage, and the color of the hood can be useful. Also notice whether there is an eye crescent or not, and if present, what the exact shape is. Some species have distinct ear spots, particularly in basic or winter plumage adults and in the immatures. The mantle color is still one of the most important field marks in identifying these gulls. Many observers refer to the entire upper surface of the wing as the mantle, but here we will confine it to the upper back. Observers often have trouble identifying the parts of the wing, especially when it is folded up at rest, and it is difficult to know which feathers you are viewing. Always start with the wingtip, of which just the tips of the primaries are visible. They extend out past the tertials, which are on the inside of the secondaries. With a few of the smaller gulls, the tertials can be important determiners in identification. The primary extension past the tertials is referred to as the primary tip projection, but gull watchers also look to see how far the longest primary extends past the tail. The large group of feathers that protects the meeting of the wing to the body are the scapulars. They are often colored like the mantle. Most adults of these species still have variable amounts of white in the terminal portions of the primaries. These show as white spots on the folded wingtip. The shape and number of these white spots varies more between these species than in the large gulls. As we learned with large gulls, most species have distinct wingtip patterns, so it is important to see the spread wing, either stretched when at rest or when it is in flight. On the spread wing, carefully note the pattern of the outer primaries. If black is present, how extensive is it? Are mirrors present, and if so, how many are there, and what is their size? A few of our smaller gulls show distinctly dark carpal bars during their first year of life. Before moving on to our first species, let's just pause a moment and look at the feather groups on the spread wing. The ring-billed gull is one of our most common and familiar North American gulls. Indeed, over much of the interior, it is the dominant gull. The ring-billed gull is a migratory species with a large breeding range in the interior of North America from the northwest east to the Cascades, east to the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence River region. It has greatly expanded its range and become much more abundant during the 20th century. For instance, early in the century, it was absent as a breeder on the Great Lakes. Now it is an abundant breeder. The ring-billed has a large winter range that encompasses much of North America, and have occurred rarely into Middle America as well, exceptionally even into Colombia. Though unrecorded in Britain or Ireland prior to 1973, they are now regular, with annual totals numbering around 100. They occur casually elsewhere in Europe, primarily from coastal regions. Some ringbills, usually subadults, remain on the winter grounds through the summer months. The ringbilled can be found in a wide variety of habitats, including the more obvious locations like coastal beaches and garbage dumps, but they are also found in many other situations. And indeed, this species is a real opportunist. At the Salton Sea, where it is very abundant in winter, large numbers regularly raid date palm orchards, where they actually strip dates off the palms. And of course, they are well known from parking lots in suburban malls. More than one irreverent birder has suggested that it be renamed the mall gull. The ring-billed gull is a medium-sized, white-headed gull. Because it is so numerous, it is often taken for granted, and the full range of variation, particularly with the young birds, is not appreciated. This has led to confusion with other species, particularly with birds from the mew-gull complex. The ring-billed gull is always conspicuously smaller than the herring gull. It also appears rounder-headed, and has a somewhat thinner bill than herring, though note the rather blunt tip. In adult basic plumage, the white head is finely streaked, with varying amounts of dark gray on the crown, nape, and hind neck. On some individuals, the streaking is so concentrated it gives the ring-billed a hooded look, as you can see in this example. The sides of the head usually have finer streaks under the eyes and on the ear coverts. The sides of the neck, throat, and upper breast are also finely streaked as well. The ring-billed gull has pale gray upper parts, and indeed, it is one of our palest gulls, the gray color being almost exactly the same shade as in a Smithsonianus herring gull. It is decidedly paler than California gull and mew gull, which we will cover next. The tertials are variably tipped with limited white, but the contrast is just barely evident. The scapular crescent, if present, is hardly visible. The folded primaries look uniformly black, with inconspicuous white primary tips. The eye is pale yellow. The bill is a dull yellow with a sharply defined and complete black subterminal band. While this black subterminal ring is characteristic of adult ringbills, one needs to keep in mind that subadults of most gull species also show black subterminal rings of variable width. Apart from this black subterminal ring, note again the blunt bill tip of ringbilled. The legs are a dull shade of yellow. The adult alternate ring-billed gull has a clean white head and neck. The bill is now more intensely colored, being brightest at the tip. The orange gape line is readily visible. The orbital ring is vermilion. Like the bill, the legs have also intensified in color. In flight, notice the contrast between the pale mantle and inner wing and the mostly black primaries. There is one white mirror on P10 and often a smaller one on P9. By comparison, the adult California is darker mantled and shows more extensive black in the wingtips, and shows a large white mirror on both P10 and P9. Ringbilled shows much more extensive black in the outer wing than our North American race of mew-gull. We will revisit the wingtip pattern of ringbilled in much more detail next, when we review the entire mew-gull complex. The secondaries are blue-gray, shading to white at the tip. In flight from below, the underwing looks uniformly pale, except for the black in the primary tips, much like our Smithsonianus herring, and unlike California gull, which shows darker gray shading at the base of the secondaries. The juvenile ringbilled looks dramatically different from the adults. Illustrative of the early beginning of fall movement is the regular appearance of birds in juvenile plumage well away from the breeding grounds as early as late July. The plumage is variably retained well into the fall, and on a few even into the early winter, which often leads to misidentification, particularly with young mew gulls. Juvenile ringbills are heavily mottled over much of the body. The mantle feathers are light brown with broad buff margins. The bill is black at the tip, with a variable amount of pink at the base. The legs are pink. As previously noted, the molt of first winter is individually variable in extent, and particularly in timing. Overall, the body plumage becomes distinctly paler, and the gray mantle, comparable now in color to that of adults, becomes evident. The acquisition of an adult-like mantle by first winter is characteristic of 3-year gulls. Notice the more advanced plumage of these first winter ringbills in comparison to the slightly larger first winter Californian. Where the actual confusion exists is between first winter ring-billed and second-year California, as we shall soon see. There is also considerable confusion with the Mu-Gull complex, especially with the nominate European race, and we'll address that during that species account. While the body of the first winter ring-billed has paled considerably, there is still much spotting below, though there is much individual variation. And the flanks are neatly marked with short, V-shaped bars. The undertail coverts are sometimes barred. Above, the streaking often coalesces into a more solid gray-brown patch at the base of the hind neck. The wing and tail retain the juvenile feathers. The folded primaries appear extensively black, as do the tertials, which have narrow pale edges. A field character that is useful at close range and fresh plumage is the pattern of the centers of the lesser and median secondary wing coverts. The centers of these coverts are dark chocolate, edged thinly with white. These dark centers are concave and appear pointed at the tip. This pattern is distinctly different than that shown in the Mu-Gull complex. The greater secondary coverts are extensively pale gray, which is unlike the barred coverts of second-year birds of the larger 4-year gull species. By first winter, the bill is sharply bicolored, pink at the base and black at the tip. At first glance, first winter ringbills can be confused with second winter California gulls, but the California has a darker hood and a darker gray mantle. Also, on the California, notice the more grayish-green legs and the longer bill, which is also grayish-green rather than pinkish at the base. In flight, notice on this first winter ringbill how the blackish outer primaries and primary coverts contrast sharply with the much paler inner primaries. The secondaries are also dark, and there is a distinct mottled carpal bar. The blackish tail band is often broken up into more of a barred pattern on the outer tail feathers. This barred pattern extends to the outer web of the outer tail feather. A few birds show a crisp, clean tail band, which can cause confusion with some subspecies of the Mu-Gull complex. Notice how the blackish-brown on the outer feathers extends up the sides of the tail. The tail is otherwise whitish and is finely speckled with brown, the speckling extending to the upper tail coverts, as we can see with this bird. In flight from below, the underwings are extensively whitish with darker markings. The underwings are decidedly paler than first years of the larger 4-year gulls, and of those of our North American subspecies of Mu-Gull. First summer plumage is generally like first winter, but the underparts are even whiter. Overall, the bird exhibits a paler look, especially in the wing coverts, as these feathers deteriorate from wear and fading. The wing and tail are retained from juvenile, but often some coverts, and sometimes a few tail feathers, are replaced with new ones. The bill may also develop a yellowish tone by this time. By second winter, the bird now looks much like a winter adult. Indeed, a careful look is necessary to differentiate this age from older birds. As we can see on this bird, though, the streaking on the head can be more extensive than adults, and sometimes there is spotting on the flanks as well. The tail is white, generally with subterminal black spots forming a broken tail band. More rarely, the band is continuous. In other birds, spotting is completely absent. Most have developed a pale iris, but beware of tardy individuals that still retain a dark eye. The bill has developed a band by now, and the legs have become a yellow-green to yellow. The outer primaries are black, much like the adult, but largely lack the white terminal spots. The difference is more apparent in flight, where we can see that the black extends into the primary coverts. Note also that there is only one small white mirror on P10. In flight, we can also look for traces of a tail band, if one is present. Though a ring-billed gull is closely related to other typical white-headed gulls, it has occasionally hybridized with francolins and laughing gulls. The mew, or the common gull, is a whole Arctic species that is divided into 4 subspecies and 3 distinctive subspecies groups. Although all 3 groups have occurred in North America, only the smallest race, Brachyrhynchus, is North American. We will focus initially on this distinctive subspecies, widely known as the mew gull, and then later turn our attention to the Palearctic races. The mew gull breeds in Alaska and western Canada, and rarely east to Manitoba. Mew gulls winter commonly along the Pacific coast south to southern California, with a few found in northern Baja California. It is rare or casual well inland away from the coast, but vagrants occur casually throughout much of interior North America, east to the Great Lakes region. East Coast reports of mew gull, apparently, nearly all pertain to the nominate race, common gull. Although mew is a medium-sized gull, it is distinctly smaller than ringbill, as we can see with this bird surrounded by ringbills. Notice too the size difference between this mew gull and the 2 California gulls. The head shape is relatively round, and the large dark eye stands out in all ages. On the water it often has a distinctive posture, with tail and wingtips raised high above the water surface. Looking closely, you can see 4 or 5 primaries exposed beyond the tertials at rest. The bill is quite narrow at the base and seems slightly decurved throughout its length. The gonadial angle is minimal at best. In fact, our mew gull was formerly named small-billed gull or short-billed gull by Dwight. Like other gulls, mews are quite vocal on the breeding grounds, and one can loosely describe their loud vocalizations as mews. Adult mew gulls have medium gray upper parts and have extensive white in the primaries. Notice that this mew gull's mantle color is very close in coloration to that of the larger California gulls swimming beside it. In basic plumage, mew gulls show extensive brown head markings, but rather than being streaks, they appear to be more mottled in nature, and overall could even be called a wash. This washing is quite characteristic of Brachyrhynchus and is often very heavy about the neck and back of the nape, as we can see in each of these examples. The wash also extends down along the sides of the breast. Notice the very broad white tertial crescent, and also a distinct white scapular crescent. The dainty bill is mostly unmarked and a dull yellow at this time of the year. In some winter adults, there is some dusky near the tip. This seems to be mostly on the lower mandible and does not have the crisp ring effect of the larger and paler ringbill. The iris color varies from dark yellow to dark brown. The legs are greenish yellow. In the breeding season, the head becomes pure white, and the yellow of the bill intensifies. The orbital ring is red. In flight, adult mew gulls show extensive white in the tips of the primaries. There are large subterminal mirrors in both P9 and P10, with the one on P10 being larger. This often gives the impression of an entirely white wingtip. In mew gulls, the black in the primary tips reaches the primary coverts only along the outer web of the outer primary, and overall the black extends up the primaries only on the outer 2 to 3 primaries. The pattern on the primaries from P5 through P8 is quite distinctive in Brachyrhynchus. They show large white tongues that are then separated narrowly from the white primary tips by a narrow black subterminal bar. Also note how close P9 and P10 are in length, which results in a roundish tip to the wing in flight. The secondaries are gray with a broad white trailing edge. In flight from below, we can view this same distinctive primary pattern. Notice also the gray shading at the base of the secondaries, which contrast to the whiter underwing coverts, the pattern being similar to that of California gull. Adult mews can be most easily confused with the larger and paler mantled ring-billed gull, but there are lots of important differences, which makes the identification fairly straightforward given adequate views. In addition to the darker mantle, notice that the eye is normally dark, rather than distinctly pale as in ring-billed. And the much thinner bill, at best, shows only a rather vague subterminal band, rather than a clear-cut black subterminal ring. In this side-by-side comparison, we can see how truly different the bill shapes are. In particular, Note the blunt-tipped look of the ring-billed. With basic adults, the brown head washing looks distinctly different from the fine blackish-streaked appearance of the ring-billed. Notice too the rounder head of Mew. Ring-bills show less prominent tertial crescents and essentially lack a scapular crescent, while both features are obvious on Mew. On the folded wing tips, the white primary tips are much more pronounced on Mew. Notice too the subtle posture differences on the swimming birds, with ring-billed seeming to sink in more to the water, while Mew has the tail and wingtips raised high above the water. In flight, notice the big difference in the amount of black in the wingtip. As we can see in these two illustrations, in Mew the black is greatly reduced when compared to ring-billed. In addition to less black, the white mirrors and tongues are larger and much better defined. Notice too the darker upper surface to the wings, which contrasts with the broad white trailing edge to the secondaries. A more subtle distinction is that ring-bills have a more pointed wing look to it than Mew. This is because in ring-billed, P10 is relatively longer in relation to P9 than in Mew. Confusion might also be possible with the much larger California. This is because both species have dark eyes, greenish legs, comparable mantle colors, large white mirrors in the outer primaries, and gray shading at the base of the underside of the secondaries. But California shows much more black in the wingtips, and the bill shape and pattern is completely different. Overall, the Mew is uniformly brown in juvenile plumage. While Mew gulls do not normally move well south into the middle of October, a few individuals regularly move south earlier, and juvenile birds have been seen in Southern California as early as the middle of August. Don't let yourself be deceived by this unusual plumage. By first basic, the back becomes a medium gray. The retained juvenile wing coverts are solid warm brown and are narrowly edged with U-shaped pale buff margins. There is a broad buffy crescent at the end of the folded tertials. The primaries are blackish brown with thin pale edges. In fact, the primary pattern at both rest and in flight, as well as the overall coloration, can at first glance suggest a first winter Thayer's gull. The entire head of the first basic Mew gull is heavily washed and mottled with brown. Notice the characteristic small, almost dove-shaped head with the proportionally large dark eye. In first basic plumage, the fleshy color of a Mew gull's bill is more extensive than a juvenile's. The bill coloration is also more blended than in ringbill. The brownish wash becomes even more solid on the hind neck, breast, and belly, while the vent and undertail coverts are more whitish, with heavy dark brown flecking and barring. In flight from above, notice that the rump and upper tail coverts are heavily barred, but are lighter in color than the tail, which is either solidly dark brown or shows just very limited light mottling at the base of the outer tail feathers. The primaries are dark brown on the outer webs, but show extensive pale on the inner webs. There is no visible carpal bar. In flight from below, the underwings are largely brownish. Although Mew gulls approach ring-billed in size, the young birds are dramatically different in plumage, as we can see in this comparison from Fairport Harbor in northeast Ohio. This particular Mew gull is far away from its normal winter range, and is one of the very few ever to be found in Ohio. The Mew is much more uniformly brown, and lacks the more blackish speckling effect of the ringbill's overall whiter plumage. As we discussed earlier, Mew has a larger appearing eye and a thinner and more delicate bill. The bill coloration is also more blended than in ringbill. Notice too the darker gray mantle color of Mew. The internal lesser and median secondary covert pattern is distinct in each species, with ringbilled showing dark, arrowhead-shaped markings versus the crisp pale border to the dark shovel-shaped covert feathers of the Mew. In flight, notice again that the rump and upper tail coverts are heavily barred, and the tail is essentially all dark. This differs from the white upper tail coverts and narrow blackish tail bands, or band, of ringbilled. Ringbilled also has blacker primaries with less pale on the inner webs, as well as a more evident dark carpal bar. The underwing linings are largely brownish in mew, while whitish in ring-billed. By spring, the mantle is solidly gray, and the overall body color has lightened considerably, an effect enhanced by feather wear and bleaching. By second winter, the bird now more closely resembles the adult, the upper parts being largely a medium shade of gray. The wing coverts and tertials do show a variable number of grayish-brown feathers, with paler fringes. The head and chest are heavily washed with brown, and some brownish may extend down through the flanks. The base of the bill may be a dull blue-gray or grayish flesh color with a dark tip. During the course of the winter, the bill becomes greenish-yellow. The legs are variable in coloration, varying from bluish-gray to a pale fleshy color. The white primary tips are less evident than the full adult. As we discussed in ring-billed, it is always easier to separate second winters from adults when viewed in flight. The outer three primaries are largely a solid blackish-brown, though there is one white mirror on P10, and sometimes a smaller one on P9 as well. There is also blackish on the median and greater primary coverts, and on the elula. The tail markings are quite variable. In a small percentage, the tail will have a distinct and solid band, or the tail will be entirely white. Most show sparse black markings, or can have heavier markings that still do approach a more solid band. From our experience, the band most often shows a break in the center of the tail. Exceptionally, the tail can be nearly entirely dark, like in first winter. From below, notice that there are still some markings on the underwing coverts. Second winter birds can also easily be confused with ringbills, but note the darker gray upper parts. In flight, notice also that the outer primaries show less dark, with more gray on the inner webs, and more white at the feather tips than in ringbills. The dark tip to the bill is quite suggestive of ringbill, but it isn't as cleanly demarcated into a subterminal ring, and the bill base is more grayish than the yellow-based bill of the same age ringbill. The legs of most second basic mew gulls are dull blue-gray, grayish flesh, or grayish-green, quite unlike the yellow of similarly aged ringbills. The dark eye will separate most mews, but beware of those second winter ringbills that still largely are dark-eyed. The molt into second alternate plumage further reduces the brown of immature plumage and produces an unstreaked white head. Many individuals will have the soft parts colored like the adult. We have so far confined our discussion to our North American race of mew gull, Larus canis brachyrhynchus. Now let's turn and look at the species globally. As stated earlier, the species Larus canis has 4 described subspecies and 3 distinct subspecies groups, one of which is brachyrhynchus. Across the Palearctic, there are 3 additional subspecies. From west to east, we have nominate canis, heinii, and kamchatchensis. Collectively, canis and heinii form one subspecies group, with only minor differences between them. These 2 subspecies are widely known as the common gull. Kamchatchensis forms the 3rd group, and is sometimes referred to as the Kamchatka gull. Our maps illustrate the breeding ranges of all 3 subspecies. Looking at the species as a whole, there is an increasing cline of size from west to east. Brachyrhynchus is the smallest, and Kamchatchensis is the largest. But as we can see, females are smaller than males, so there is overlap between races when comparing different sexes. Still, when comparing extremes, like a small female brachyrhynchus versus a large male Kamchatchensis, the difference is dramatic. Within the 3 Palearctic races, there is a cline of increasing darkness from paler canis to darker Kamchatchensis. North American brachyrhynchus is similar to Kamchatchensis. Turning first to the nominate European race, that breeds as close to North America as Iceland, and a few occur annually in Newfoundland, primarily during the winter season. It is also casual from the Maritimes and the coastal Northeast, and apparently nearly all records of mew gulls from the coastal Northeast pertain to this nominate race, or the common gull. On the other hand, there may be no fully authenticated records of this race away from the East Coast, except from central Pennsylvania. Adult common gulls have a slightly paler mantle color than adult mews. Common gulls average larger in size, though there is overlap, and have a slightly larger bill. In basic plumage, common gulls consistently show a blackish subterminal ring on the bill, usually not as prominent as in ring-billed, but the effect is decidedly different from mew. Some individuals show black on the bill, even in alternate plumage. Let's use the illustrations to compare the primary pattern. Notice the much more extensive black in common, particularly on P8. Like the individual in this drawing, notice how the small white mirror is surrounded by black, while on mew, the larger white mirror is connected to the more extensive gray base of the primary. Actually, the large majority of commons lack any mirror on P8, as is in this drawing. As we can see, the wingtip pattern is actually much closer to ring-billed. And indeed, for a variety of reasons, separation from ring-billed is less straightforward than it was in mew. In addition to the similar wingtip pattern, common averages closer in size and mantle color to ring-billed. And in basic plumage, commons usually show a rather clear-cut blackish subterminal ring. Also notice the more distinct head flecking on common, rather than the more washed effect of mew. Again, the overall effect is more suggestive of ring-billed. In separating common from ring-billed, the mantle of common is usually darker than that of ring-billed, but some commons can be as pale. Most ring-bills are conspicuously larger than the majority of commons, though there is some size overlap. The ring-bill differs structurally by looking bulkier, stockier, and deeper chested. While swimming, it looks flat-backed, sleek, and attenuated compared to the more rounded back and raised tail and wing look of common. These are the same shape differences we saw earlier in mew. Remember the blunt-tipped and rather thick bill of a ringbill. Now compare with this thinner and decurved bill of this common gull. The common gull has less of a gonadial angle. This is one of the key differences which holds for all ages. If well seen, the eye color is diagnostic. It is dark and common. Ringbill has a pale iris, but this is difficult to detect at a greater distance. The head of a ringbill usually appears less rounded than common, but this is rather subjective. Common gulls usually show a prominent tertial crescent and scapular crescent. The tertials are barely edged with white in a ringbill and lack the common's conspicuous broad white crescent. This is an excellent field mark. However, as we can see here on these adult ringbills, observed the same day in Virginia, there is variability in the amount of white on the tertials. And the extreme, here, is very similar in the amount of white found on the average tertial crescent of a common gull. The white primary tips are more conspicuous on common, much as we saw previously in mew. The size difference may be more obvious in flight, when ring-billed looks distinctly longer and broader wing than common. As mentioned with mew gull, the wingtips of a common gull are more rounded than those of ring-billed. While the wingtip pattern is more like ring-bill, there are important differences. In particular, the white mirrors on P10 and P9 are much larger. And notice how the black on P7, on most ringbills, creeps up the outer web. Turning now to first-year birds, it needs to be stated from the outset that juveniles and first winter commons are much more similar to ringbills than they are to mews, and can be quite difficult to separate. Indeed, extreme caution is necessary before claiming any first winter common in North America. The best character remains the bill structure. Common's bill is slender, pointed, and slightly curved in direct comparison to the thick, parallel-edged, and blunt-tipped bill of the ring-billed. The demarcation between the usually pale flesh pink base and prominent black tip is very sharp on ringbills. The more slender bill on common results in less obvious demarcation. Also, while some may show pinkish bases like ringbills, the majority have a grayish-green tint to the base. Note on common gull, the dark smudging is heaviest on the nape and neck, while on first-year ringbills, the smudging or flecking is heaviest on the crown and rear of the head. Commons are also usually less mottled and spotted about the head and breast. As with the adults, the mantle of ringbilled is slightly paler gray than common, which results in less contrast. There is sometimes a white scapular crescent present on common, which is not apparent on these first-year ringbills. The differences in the lesser and median secondary wing coverts and on the tertials form key field marks. but ones that require close views to accurately determine the exact patterning. On common, these coverts are usually filled in smoothly with warm brown and fringed evenly with pale. On ringbill, the coverts are blacker, but the black is confined to the center and a subterminal band. Notice also that the dark center extends to the tip of the feather, thus breaking the pale fringe. The tertial pattern is also quite important. In ringbill, the tertials are solid dark brown with narrow white edges. On common, the center is a paler brown and the white edge is broader. One needs to keep in mind that wear and fading will reduce the usefulness of these field marks as winter progresses, as we can see on this more faded bird in March. One additional feature is that the greater secondary coverts are paler gray on ringbill, which along with the blacker medians and tertials results in more contrast than in common. Finally, at rest, note that ringbill shows darker barring on the undertail coverts. In flight, recall that most ringbills show considerable dark barring on the upper tail coverts, which is essentially lacking in common. This difference combined with the tail pattern creates an important field mark. On common, the tail base is white, and there is a single clear-cut black subterminal band. Some ringbills show multiple narrow subterminal bands at the tail base, unlike any common, while others show a single band, more like common. Note though on ringbill, the black from the main tail band typically creeps up the outer web of each feather, which creates a more jagged effect. Combined with the more mottled upper tail coverts, the overall appearance of the band is less clean-cut than in common. Both species show variation, so the differences can't be used for all birds. On some ringbills, the tail band is more clearly demarcated, while on some commons, the dark on the outer webs of the rectrices extends into the white tail base, and the upper tail coverts can show gray mottling at the base. If the views are exceptional, look carefully at the pattern of the outer tail feather. It is white on common and mottled on ringbilled. Differentiating young commons from young mews is a much simpler task, though we are not aware of any circumstance where the two subspecies have actually been seen together. Juvenile and first winter mews are much darker, being more of a uniform brown color. Additionally, in flight, recall that mew had mostly dark underwings. Also, mew has heavily mottled upper tail coverts, and the tail is essentially completely dark. On commons, the underwing is much paler, more like ringbilled. And, as we just saw, the upper tail coverts and tail base is white, with a clear-cut subterminal black band. Second winter commons closely resemble adults. The differences between adults and second winters are much the same as in mew, but typically the tail is less marked, usually entirely white, but some have a few faint subterminal marks. But as we have seen, a few mews have white or very faintly marked tails. The most reliable way to differentiate second winter birds is the pattern on the wingtip. The black on the wingtip of common is more solid and extensive. On mew, the blackish is more restricted and is less extensive. Also useful in second winters is the difference we saw earlier in the adults between the more washed head of mew and speckled head of common. In North America, there is a slight possibility of confusion between the second year mew with the first year common. If the mew had a solid black tail band with mostly brownish upper wings contrasting with the gray saddle, the effect would be similar to a first winter common. To avoid this pitfall, look carefully at the soft bark colors and the pattern of the upper wing. In particular, the prominent secondary bar of a first winter common, which is absent on all second winter mews. Second winter commons can be told from second winter ringbills by the same means that adults can be told, except, as we have noted, some second winter ringbills still have dark eyes. When seen in flight, the second year ringbill shows only a small white mirror on the outer primary, while the second year common shows one or two obvious white mirrors. To the east of Canis is the larger and slightly darker mantled Hynei, but these are only average differences, and all plumages closely resemble one another. We presume that these photos all pertain to Hynei, as they were taken of birds in China, well to the east of the known range of Canis. There is no evidence for Hynei ever having occurred in North America. Let's finally turn to our remaining race of Larus canis, the Northeast Asian race, Kamchatchensis, which we will hereafter refer to as the Kamchatka gull. Keep in mind that mew is almost unknown from Asia, but has been documented once from Hong Kong. There is no known intergradation between the two subspecies. In North America, it is thus far known only from western Alaska, where it is very rare, and nearly all records are for the offshore islands, principally the western Aleutians, but it has been recorded casually north to St. Lawrence Island. Keep in mind that Brachyrhynchus is restricted to the Alaskan mainland, though it has been recorded for the Pribilof Islands, so Bering Sea reports could pertain to either subspecies. Observers on the west coast should be alert as well for the possibility of Kamchatka gull. This individual from Gamble was not seen well enough to identify the subspecies. Remember that ringbilled is rare in Alaska and is casual anywhere away from the southeast part of the state. As stated earlier, the Kamchatka gull is our largest subspecies. It appears heavy-chested, and the head is distinctly angular, with a sloping forehead and fairly flat crown. Notice the pale eye, which is apparently typical of Kamchatka, though some Brachyrhynchus can show some pale in the iris, and some Kamchatka gulls can appear darker-eyed. The bills of Kamchatka gulls average longer and heavier than the other races of Larus canis, particularly in comparison with the diminutive Brachyrhynchus. Along with the pale eye and the more sloping forehead, one can see the resemblance to ring-billed gull, and there is overlap in all measurements. Keep in mind that the measurements can differ dramatically between sexes, so these described characters are most apparent with males. Adult Kamchatka gulls typically have unmarked bills and basic, as well as alternate plumage. Apart from the structural differences and the average difference in eye color, the wingtip pattern needs to be carefully studied before determining whether the bird is Kamchatka or mew. Both show a white wedge that separates the gray bases from the black distal portions of the central primaries. This is lacking in the canis group. But there is a key difference between Kamchatka and mew. In mew, the white wedge is broad and extends from P8 to P5, while on Kamchatka, the wedge is narrower, less conspicuous, and does not appear on P8. As we saw with the canis group, the much less extensive black on P8 is the key difference on mew. Turning to young birds, juvenile Kamchatka gulls are like juvenile mews, but are not quite as dark brown or as uniform. The overall effect is more speckled. First winter Kamchatka gulls are similar to mew gull in that they are darker below and on the rump, under tail, and upper tail coverts than in the canis group. But as with the juvenile, the appearance is less uniform than mew. While some Kamchatkas can have nearly all dark tails, as in this example, and essentially overlap with mew, most do not. More typical for first-year birds is a more canis-like tail pattern, with a whitish base and a distinct subterminal band. However, at close range, it can be seen that the inner webs have some brownish on them. Note also the more speckled upper tail coverts, though they are less marked than mew and therefore contrast more. The underwing coverts are intermediate in pattern between the pale canis group and the much darker mew. Returning to the bill, apart from Kamchatka having a thicker bill, note the clean separation between the rich pink base and the blackish tip. In mew, the bill base is duller, the separation is less clear-cut, and the tip is usually more extensively dark. Separation of Kamchatka from mew in second winter plumage has not yet been carefully worked out. There are the average structural clues, and a distinctly pale iris would strongly favor Kamchatka. It appears that Kamchatka, like mew, may show more markings on the underwing linings, a potentially useful distinction from the canis group. Kamchatka gulls show a broken tail band, which fits well into the variation of mew, but again is stronger than the canis group. We believe that as with the adults, second-year Kamchatka gulls show more black in the wingtips, at least on average. The pattern on P8 appears particularly important. In summary, starting with mew gull in North America, we find a gentle increase in size as we head eastward. With adults and second-year birds, the amount of black in the wingtips is the most important distinguishing feature, with mews showing the least, and the other groups having wingtips more like ring-billed gull, but with larger white mirrors. Collectively, the common gull group is distinct from mew in all plumages, and first-year birds are actually more similar to ringbill. Though it is the largest race, the Kamchatka gull is intermediate between the Mu and common gull groups in many aspects, as we have seen in our examples. We feel that Peter Grant summarized the overall problem best. The plumage differences between Nominate Canis and Brachyrhynchus are in themselves apparently sufficient to warrant specific status for Brachyrhynchus, but clinal nature of plumage and size differences between the four subspecies, especially intergradation between Heinii and Kamchatchensis in Siberia, and the similarities of plumage, especially first years, between Kamchatchensis and Brachyrhynchus, are strong arguments against any split. Obviously, additional study is needed to more accurately determine the relationship of the three subspecies groups. Hermann's gull is one of North America's most distinctive-looking gulls. It is a bird of the Sea of Cortez in Mexico, but most birders know it as a post-breeding wanderer to the California coast. It is a fairly common breeder around the Sea of Cortez, also called the Gulf of California, the range extending south to Nayarit, Mexico. However, it is a local breeder throughout this range. Approximately 90% of the world's population breeds from the Isla Raza, Baja California North Colony, which has over 600,000 pairs. A few have occasionally bred on the California coast. A pair bred on Seal Beach Rocks off Vandenberg Air Force Base in 1980. There was at least one record from Alcatraz Island in San Francisco Bay in June of 1980, and more recently a breeding record from Ano Nuevo in both 1994 and 1995. Hermann's gulls return to the breeding colonies by March. This is earlier than most other North American gulls, and it is important to note because it dictates the subsequent molt timings. Post-breeding dispersal begins as early as late May and begins in earnest by mid-June. Unique, too, is the fact that most birds migrate north after their early nesting period, though some also migrate south as far as Guatemala. The species is common along the mid-California coast and disperses regularly as far north as British Columbia. It has been recorded from as far north as southeast Alaska. A few non-breeders, mostly immatures, remain in California throughout the year. Hermann's gull is rare inland, though it is regular at the Salton Sea, and casual elsewhere in the southwest, where it has been recorded east of West Texas. There are exceptional sightings from Ohio and Michigan. Generally, this species has been regarded by most authorities as a 3-year gull, although for some time several West Coast birders have considered Hermann's to be a 4-year gull. Recent critical observations by Steve Howell of birds in active pre-basic molt have helped confirm this, and we here provide documentation of the 4-year cycle of Hermann's gull. Hermann's gull is a slender, medium-sized gull. As you can see, it is similar in size to ring-billed gull. It is noticeably larger than this Mu gull, yet considerably smaller and less bulky than these western gulls. The Hermann's gull in any plumage is not likely to be confused with any other regularly occurring North American species. Hermann's gulls have a strong and purposeful flight, particularly when chasing terns or other gulls in Jaeger-like fashion. Indeed, young Hermann's gulls are frequently mistaken initially as Jaegers. The adult winter or basic plumaged Hermann's gull is an attractive bird. The mantle is a deep mouse gray, and the head possesses a dusky hood, indistinctly streaked with grayish-brown and white. It is paler on the forehead and lores. As we can see on these two individuals, observed on the same day in November, the range of head streaking varies. The eye has a partial eye ring, white posteriorly. The chin and upper throat are white, though the throat can have faint dusky flecks. The underparts are gray. Usually you can notice a white line formed by the trailing edge of the secondaries, peeking out from under the wing coverts. At rest, a noticeable scapular crescent is apparent. The tertials are also broadly tipped with white, creating a strong tertial crescent. The primaries are black, with narrow spots on the inners, but apparently never on the 3 outers. The tail is wholly black, except for a fairly broad white tip. Hermann's gull is the only gull with an almost wholly black tail when adult. Even the gull species named for its tail, black-tailed gull, which we will cover next in our video, has black only at the terminal half of the tail, not basally. The bill is vermilion, or scarlet, all the way to the base and gape, and is banded at the tip with black. The extreme tip is pale or white, but this may not be noticeable. The legs and feet are blackish brown to olive. The iris is a tawny olive or cream. The eyelids are an orange scarlet. The adult basic plumage is acquired by a complete pre-basic molt in midsummer. Full alternate plumage is acquired by a partial pre-alternate molt early in the winter. This plumage is similar to the winter plumage, except for a white hood, separated crisply on the nape, but blending into the gray of the breast. These birds observed at the beginning of February in Monterey, California, have already attained the white head, which is typical for this species. Indeed, many have acquired breeding plumage by mid-January. Returning birds seen on the Californian coast in early summer are also in the immaculate breeding plumage. The bill and orbital ring intensify to bright carmine or vermilion. The bill usually has a slight black tip. The extremity of the tip may be yellowish. Otherwise, the plumage is similar to winter. In flight, the adult Hermann's is unlikely to be confused with any other North American gull. The combination of dark upper and underwings is unique among our regularly occurring gull species. A few individuals do show white wing patches, as you can see in this bird. All secondaries are tipped with white, producing a broad white trailing edge. As noted previously, the black tail with a broad white tip is a character seen only on adult Hermann's. Some larger gull species also have a nearly all-black tail in juvenile and first winter plumage, but it often contrasts with the whitish rump, while in Hermann's the rump is slate gray. A fresh juvenile bird is distinct for its uniformly deep brown body, looking blackish at a distance, with darker wings and buff edgings. The back and mantle are a deep sooty brown, with narrow, scaly buff edges, including the rump and tail coverts. First winter birds are still overall dark brown, without any gray in the mantle, and this is a characteristic associated with four-year gulls. They retain most of their juvenile coverts, which is an additional trait of four-year gulls, and those coverts become abraded and paler, and the buff edgings are lost. The back, head, and underparts are uniformly a deep fuscous brown. The eye-ring is dusky, but is generally lost in the surrounding brown, adding to the overall dark appearance. The bill is a light buff color near the gape, darkening through pinkish to a black tip. The legs and feet are black or olive brown, like a dark coffee color. The underparts are similarly colored, except for a few buff edges on the sides, throat, flanks, and tail coverts. The primaries in their coverts, secondaries, and alula are a dull brownish black. The tips of the feathers are barely paler. The tertials and coverts are also brown and inconspicuously tipped with pale buff. These first winter birds lack the prominent tertial crescent that is visible in all subsequent plumages. In flight, first-year Hermann's gulls look all dark. As we noted earlier, they can be mistaken for Jaegers, especially when jousting with other gulls or terns for prey. The rather smooth and even dark coloration is distinctive of this species. In bright light, the secondaries show a dark trailing edge that contrasts slightly from the rest of the upper wing. The tail is dull black, sometimes very narrowly tipped with pale buff, and sometimes not at all. There is little or no contrast between the rump and mantle. First alternate plumage is acquired by a partial pre-alternate molt, probably in mid to late winter. The wing and tail of juvenile plumage is retained, each is worn and paler. The bill and legs are much like first winter, though the bill sometimes begins to get an orangish tinge basally. Second winter plumage is acquired by a complete pre-basic molt in summer. Overall, the plumage at this age is uniform dark sooty brown, but the underparts are now slightly lighter than the upper parts. The mantle is a deep brownish gray, grayer than first winter, but still browner than in third year or adult plumage. The difference in mantle coloration is slight, but evident in this comparison, made between this second year and this first year, and with these much grayer adults. The rump is now slate gray. The head has a dusky hood to below the eyes, and this hood contrasts ever so slightly darker with the nape. The eye crescents of the adult are still lacking, or if present are indistinct. The face and throat have become paler than in first years, but not markedly so. The underparts are much grayer than in first winter, but browner than adults. The primary coverts are now a fairly smooth brown, though have a bit of gray mixed in. The mixture of browns and grays on the coverts in second basic birds is also indicative of a 4-year gull. In 3-year gull species, they are normally all gray. You can see the secondary coverts have a brownish cast, but are more uniformly colored than in first years, and have lost the pale covered edges we saw in the first-year birds. Note, too, that they lack the white secondary edge protruding from beneath the wing, as we have previously seen in adult birds. By second winter, the Heermans has developed a noticeable pale tertial crescent, as you can see in each of these 4 examples. The primaries are black, without white apical spots. The tail is black, sometimes with a very narrow buffy or white terminal edge, which is slightly wider in the central rectrices. By now, the bill has an orangish space, often with some greenish tones near the gape, with the terminal third being black. Notice in these birds how the black in the bill of these second winter birds extends closer to the base on the lower mandible than the upper. The iris is brown. The legs are a brownish black to olive. In flight, the second year still looks dark from both above and below, but the gray rump contrasts some with the darker back feathers and the dark tail. The head has a slightly hooded look, more so than first years, but much less so than third years. The trailing edge of the secondaries is still dark in most, though a few may have a very narrow white trailing edge, particularly in late winter. The second alternate plumage is acquired by a partial or pre-alternate molt, probably in January and February. The eye crescents are more pronounced than in earlier ages. Overall, the gull is grayer in tone. The bare parts are brighter than in winter. A minority get rather white-headed, suggesting even an adult. The wings and tail of winter are retained. Third winter is acquired by a complete pre-basic molt in midsummer. The bird now looks much like the adult. The mantle is the same deep mouse gray. The underparts are gray, with the chin and upper throat whitish. The throat can have faint dusky flecks. The tail is black with a much broader and whiter tip than in second winter, and the iris color is now like the adult. However, there are several key differences from the adult basic plumage. The head possesses a duskier hood with a brownish cast, being paler on the forehead and lores. It is noticeably darker than the adult and shows greater contrast to the gray nape and mantle, while the adult head is lighter with dusky mottling, and instead contrasts paler to the gray nape and mantle. To review again with a second winter bird, notice how the hood contrasts with the nape, much more so than the second year. The eye now has a partial eye ring, white posteriorly, but narrower than the full adult. The bill is similar to the adult, but is more orange at the base than in the adult, which, as we stated previously, is red to the gape. It appears that at least some third basic birds still have some brown in the greater coverts. The primaries are black, with no visible light tips which the adult has. By now, the gull has developed a white trailing edge to the secondaries, and this feature can usually be seen when the bird is at rest along the bottom of the folded wing. Remember, this feature was absent in most second-year birds. Notice on this flying bird, however, the white edge is thinner than the broad white trailing edge on this adult. There is individual variation, and some third winter birds will overlap with adults in the width of the white trailing edge. Third-year birds look similar to adults in flight in other respects. Third alternate plumage is acquired by a partial pre-alternate molt early in the winter, after which many birds may not be safely distinguished from adults. Many do not acquire the full white head of the breeding adult. The bill brightens and may still carry more orange than the bright vermilion of the adult bill. On others, there is no difference. Black-tailed gull is a common Asiatic species that breeds in the Sea of Japan region. It migrates southward, with at least some, mainly immatures, occurring regularly to Hong Kong. There are a couple of records from Thailand, and even one from Australia. The species was first recorded in North America on 26 November 1954 at San Diego, California. Many of the North American records are expectedly from Alaska, where it was first recorded in May of 1980 on Attu Island in the western Aleutians. There have been an additional 10 sightings through the spring of 1998. 4 have been seen in Canada in the 90s, 1 from British Columbia, and surprisingly 2 from Nova Scotia, and more recently this individual from St. John's, Newfoundland. Records from the East Coast are odd indeed, given that nearly the entire population is in the Northwest Pacific. Yet there are other records for the East Coast states. These include well-documented records for Rhode Island, New York, New Jersey, Maryland, and Virginia, where even 2 have been seen together. One wonders if some of the same individuals are involved in the sightings from different states. What migration route the East Coast birds are using is at this point anybody's guess. But it is worth pointing out that it remains unrecorded from well-watched Europe. This bird represents Mexico's first record. An adult was even documented in 1988 in Belize, and most recently one was found at the Brownsville Dump, Texas. The black-tailed gull was widely described to be a 3-year gull. However, Uehara and Uehara describe the species as a 4-year gull. Lethaby and Bangma also suggest that this species may well be a 4-year gull. Black-tailed gulls do maintain a brown-back plumage into first summer, which is a trait widely thought to be reserved for 4-year gull species, as we just discussed with Hermann's gull. The black-tailed gull is approximately ring-billed sized. The head and neck of this adult from Rhode Island in September of 1996 appears to be less thick than the ring-billed it is with. This species is considerably smaller than the other dark-back white-headed gulls. It is long-winged, and at least 4 primary tips extend beyond the tail. The bill is quite long, without a steep gonadial angle, and is noticeably hooked at the end. As you can readily see in this same Rhode Island bird, the head is flat-looking and sloped gradually from the base of the bill. The adult black-tailed gull has a white head and a dark gray mantle and wing. The mantle is every bit as dark gray as Grellsii lesser blackback, though the latter is larger and the bill structures of the 2 are quite different. Even in this footage of the same Rhode Island bird, which was videotaped in bright light, you can see that the mantle color is as dark or darker than the surrounding laughing gulls. There is contrast between its dark gray mantle and the black wingtips, but this is diffuse and is less pronounced than in paler mantle gulls. The tips of the primaries are white and fresh plumage. The bill is the most striking feature of the head. It is proportionally long. The color is yellow, with a complete black ring at the gonies and a variable red tip. In some birds, the extreme tip of the bill is pale. Also, the nostril seems to be exceptionally large and is quite noticeable on these birds in Japan. Adult lesser blackbacks can show varying amounts of red in the bill and traces of black. However, the combination of the black crossband and decurved nature of the black-tailed is quite unlike the bill of any lesser blackback. The eye is a very pale straw color. The red orbital ring is barely discernible. The legs are also yellow, again similar to lesser blackback. In adult basic plumage, the head is washed with moderate dusky streaks, which are heaviest on the back of the head. This contrasts abruptly with the white nape and gives a distinct appearance of a collar. This black-tailed gull observed in Japan displays the immaculate white head of an alternate plumage adult. Notice how the black on the lower mandible is reduced, replaced at both sides by increased red. Other than a uniquely colored bill, the most important feature of an adult black-tailed gull is a distinct tail band. This field character can be seen on this preening Rhode Island bird, but it is best seen in flight. The broad black subterminal tail band extends across the entire tail, just touching the inner webs of the outer rectrices. The tail is tipped with a fairly wide band of white, although birders should be aware that as summer progresses, the white terminal band will become narrower through wear. While in flight, also notice the broad white trailing edge of the secondaries and inner primaries in fresh plumage. Notice that this black-tailed gull shows no subterminal mirrors in the primaries, quite unlike the large mirrors of an adult California gull or an adult lesser blackbacked. As this bird lands in the water, note again the contrast of the black primaries to the lighter charcoal upper wing. When seen from below, the underwing is quite pale, especially when compared to the underwing of a lesser blackbacked, which has a dusky trailing edge to the underwing. Notice too that each of these winter adults, even some in very advanced stages of molt, shows the distinct color we just talked about. The first winter black-tailed is strikingly clove brown. The mantle shows no sign of gray, again a trait normally found in four-year gull species. The face and chin are white and contrast boldly with the rest of the warm brown plumage. The wingtip extension is very long. The tertials are very dark brown and edged and buff. The neck and upper chest are heavily washed with dusky. With moderately close views of these birds, you can detect white eye crescents behind the eye, which contrasts with the dark feathering. The iris is dark and the bill is mostly pink, with a sharply defined broad dark terminal tip. Again, the bill is a striking feature. The legs are flesh-colored at this age. In flight, the dusky areas of the hind neck and nape we previously mentioned give a collared effect to these individuals, similar to the adult basic bird. A dark trailing secondary bar is evident and contrasts with the lighter greater coverts. The outer wing is dark. The tail is almost entirely black in first winter, similar to Heermann's gull in this respect. First winter blacktails can really be confused only with the first winter California gull. Both have a dark upper wing with a contrasting darker secondary bar, a dark tail, and a bicolored pink and black bill. However, a first winter California gull overall is much more patterned, does not have a white face, and is often dark about the eye, lacking eye crescents. It is light in the chest area as well. In flight, California gulls show varying amounts of barring on the rump. Again, a blacktail's rump is white and is devoid of any barring. If seen, the white vent is also different from California gull. This first summer individual was observed at Gamble, St. Lawrence Island and the Bering Sea on 2 June 1996. As is the case with many summer gulls, this gull has become paler through wear. The mantle has begun to show a few signs of gray. The dark tertials have been retained, although are more worn. The iris remains dark, and the bill is a very pale yellow, with a dark subterminal band. Notice also that the eye crescent is not as distinct. The legs are a very pale flesh. In flight, the dark trailing secondary bar is still evident. The tail has retained the blackness of first winter and still contrasts with an even whiter rump. When seen in flight, the first summer bird may resemble a first summer California gull, slightly more now, mainly because first summer Californias can show a largely pale rump and vent that contrasts more with a dark tail. By second winter, black-tailed gulls have acquired the adult dark gray coloration in the mantle and scapulars. The underparts and head are paler than first-year birds, but notice the grayish wash on the nape and sides of the breast and flanks that is indicative of this age group. The whitish eye crescents are still present. At some time during their second year, blacktails acquire the yellow eye characteristic of adult birds. Second basic black-tailed gulls show greenish-gray rather than flesh bills of the first winters, though as with first winter there is an abruptly defined darker tip. The leg color is greenish-gray. Both the bill pattern and the leg color resemble second winter California gull in coloration. Remember that California gull is paler mantled than black-tailed and lacks the eye crescent. Black-tailed gull often has a red bill tip as well. The tail remains all dark and contrasts neatly with the white rump, and this is best noticed while in flight. Also notice the overall darker upper wing. By third basic, the bird now closely resembles the adult. Black-tailed gulls acquire their adult tail pattern in their third basic. Such birds also show the distinctive adult bill pattern and a yellow eye. The only noticeable differences between adults and third basics are the extension of black on the wing into the primary coverts, and the lack of white tips to the primaries, as you can see in this example. But keep in mind that the white primary tips are also often lost from wear in adults. The above information was gleaned from several sources, including the fine article in Birding Magazine by Letheby and Bangma. Laughing gulls breed commonly on the Atlantic coast from Massachusetts south to Florida and along the entire Gulf Coast, Small numbers also breed north locally to the central coast of Maine, and it has bred in Nova Scotia. In the west, it is bred in southeastern California at the Salton Sea on a few occasions, where moderate numbers also occur from midsummer to well into the fall. These birds originate from colonies in the Sea of Cortez. There is also post-breeding movement north along the Atlantic coast as far as Newfoundland. South of the U.S., the laughing gull breeds throughout the Caribbean region and on the northern coast of South America. Throughout this breeding and post-breeding range of laughing, small numbers remain late into the fall and early winter. As winter progresses, the birds drift south, and the primary winter range is from the coastal Carolinas and the Gulf Coast south. It winters as far south as Brazil on the Atlantic coast and Peru on the Pacific. Though this is primarily a coastal species, very small numbers do disperse inland in eastern North America in both the spring and during the post-breeding period. This dispersal results in birds occurring regularly as far north as the Great Lakes. There, individuals have been suspected as having interbred with ring-billed gulls in the huge colonies of that species, and several such individuals, such as this one observed here at Ocean City, Maryland, have been noted along the Atlantic coast. Care needs to be taken not to confuse these odd-looking birds with other potential vagrant species. In the west, it is strictly casual away from the Salton Sea, even along the California coast. Further afield, the species has been recorded from a number of European countries. There are now well in excess of 50 records from the British Isles, where it is now recorded annually. It has also been recorded in the Pacific, where records exist as far west as Micronesia, New Zealand, and Australia. Although a medium-sized gull, laughing gulls are the largest and longest wing of the regularly occurring hooded gulls of North America. As you can see, they are smaller than ringbills. Notice, though, that they have proportionally longer wings. Particularly distinctive is the much darker dorsal coloration in all plumages, the color of laughing being about comparable to a Grailsii eye lesser black-backed. Most authorities regard this as a 3-year gull, although some individuals approaching 2 years of age can very closely resemble adults. The actual amount of black in the outer wing can be useful in aging birds up to 4 years. Laughing gull has a long bill with a rather pronounced gonidial angle for a gull of this size, which gives the bill a droopy look to the tip. This is a key identifying character in all plumages. Probably as a result of the bill length, the head shape seems somewhat sloped and flattened rather than rounded. The legs are proportionally rather long. The adult laughing gull has a lead-gray mantle and inner wing, and black wing tips. Adult laughings have white tertial and scapular crescents, and have an entirely white tail and underparts. Again, note that the wings are long, slender, and pointed, and this is apparent both at rest and in flight. The primary tip projection beyond the tail is quite noticeable. In flight, the black wing tips contrast noticeably with the dark gray upper surface of the wing. The two outermost primaries are entirely black. The rest are narrowly tipped with white like the secondaries and form a white trailing edge to the wing, which is visible on these flying birds from coastal Texas. In addition to this white trailing edge, notice that the undersurface of the primaries is very dark, and this contrasts with the whitish underwing coverts. This is a key difference from Franklin's in all plumages, as we will discuss later. Notice from above that these dark primaries blend into the gray of the upper wings without any white division. To review again, the inner primaries are tipped narrowly with white, and these white spots tend to wear off as winter progresses. Adults in winter have a black bill. When examined very closely, a small orange-red tip is usually visible. The legs are blackish. Although mostly white-headed, a key difference from Franklin's, they do retain variable amounts of gray on the head. A post-ocular spot is consistently present, a bit obscure on some, more obvious on others, such as these birds. Many winter adults have an earmuff look to the rear of the head, which is readily observable, even in flight. Basic plumage laughing gulls do have rather broad white eye crescents, but since the head is largely pale, the contrast is rather subtle. In alternate plumage, laughings have a distinct black head, and this is acquired by late winter. Notice now that the thin white crescents above and below the eye contrast sharply to the remainder of the head. The legs are a deep red. The rather long, drooping bill is dark red on most, but is brighter on some. Even bright red on a few, such as with this individual. Notice that the white tips to the primaries are now more indistinct or can even be lacking. A few laughings have a rosy blush early in the breeding season, but it is not characteristic of this species. The juvenile plumage, rarely seen in full after October, is characterized by a mostly clove-brown head, nape, and lower throat, and a scaly brown mantle. There are distinct pale edgings to the upper wing coverts. The belly is pure white and contrasts with the brown breast. All of the secondary coverts and the tertials are dark with pale fringes. There is a broad and complete blackish terminal band on the tail, and this is also characteristic to first winter plumage, as you can see on this first winter bird. By first winter, the head is whiter, particularly the forehead, lores, and throat, but there is a slaty patch that often extends around the rear of the crown. The back of the neck is also gray and is concolorous with the back and the sides and flanks. The head pales somewhat through the course of the winter, but the earmuff effect remains. The white eye crescents are visible at close range. The crown itself shows some indistinct slaty streaking as well. The white on the throat often extends around the lower border of the dark auriculars, and this forms a distinctive white half collar. We can see this well on this first winter bird. Again, note the distinctive bill shape, which characterizes all laughing gulls. The underparts are now whiter, and any gray is restricted to a wash across the breast, which continues down the sides and flanks, where it is often a darker gray. In contrast, the center of the breast can almost be whitish on some individuals. The upper parts are grayer with less brown. The mantle and scapulars are now gray. By now there are a number of new gray secondary coverts, particularly the medians. The tertials may also have been replaced, the new ones being plain gray. Look at the individual variation amongst this assemblage of first winter birds, all observed on the same day in early November. On this individual, almost no molt has taken place on the coverts, and the juvenile tertials are still present. On these other birds, much more molt has taken place, and the upper parts are decidedly grayer. The exact state of molt is more easily determined in flight when more of the coverts are visible. In flight, note that the secondaries are dark with whitish tips, and there is a variable number of brownish secondary coverts, as we have discussed earlier. Note in comparison to winter adults, there is much more dark on the primaries, and that dark extends to the greater and median primary coverts and the alula. There is also dark on the inner primaries, so that there is much less contrast with the outer primaries than we saw in the adult. The underwing is blotchy, with seemingly random dark areas. There is a white rump and a wide, black subterminal band which extends through the outermost tail feathers. By first summer, most birds become cleaner looking. The replacement of secondary coverts and tertials is complete, or nearly so. Therefore, the upper surface of the folded wing looks more uniformly gray, as indicated with this bird seen in early April. The gray wash to the sides, flanks, and chest is somewhat reduced. Some first summer birds can have wings very similar to adults, but have more black in the inner primaries and elsewhere on the outer half of the wing than adults. The underwing is still smudgy, but is a bit cleaner than in first winter. By spring, the replacement of tail feathers is often well underway, and this leads to more of a blotchy tail band effect, which is evident from this individual shown here in early April from coastal Texas. By second winter, the plumage now closely resembles that of the adult, and one has to look carefully to see the differences. On the standing bird, look particularly for the gray wash on the nape and on the sides and flanks, as opposed to the white nape and uniformly white underparts of the basic plumaged adult. The white tips to the outer primaries are small or are lacking. In flight, look for the more extensive blackish on the inner primaries, which extends to the greater and median primary coverts. Look also for traces of dark at the bases of the secondaries, and particularly for the usually thin but variable broken dark tail band. However, the central and outer tail feathers are white. On many birds, the tail markings can be lacking or are greatly reduced. By second summer, many birds will have acquired a nearly full dark hood, but the extent and perhaps the timing of the hood acquisition is variable. Usually the soft parts are darker than full adults, particularly the bill, which is mainly black. The nape and underparts, though, are now almost whitish like the adult. The white terminal primary spots are essentially lacking, but by spring they may well be reduced through wear on adults as well. Telling birds with nearly complete full hoods from full adults is easier in flight, when the details of the outer wing we described for second winter can be seen as well as any tail markings. Look at this individual with a nearly complete hood, yet with a maximum tail band, which readily identifies its age as a second summer bird. The Franklin's gull is one of the most migratory of all of the world's gulls. Indeed, only the Sabins is comparable in terms of the distance flown between the breeding and the winter grounds. At all seasons, the Franklin's is very gregarious, as we can see in many of the birds observed here. They breed in marshes in the prairie provinces of Canada, the Dakotas, the Rocky Mountain states, the Great Basin area of Utah, and very locally in northwestern Iowa. Even within the core of their breeding range, the breeding colonies shift, depending on water levels, and it is hard to map and keep track of colonies in a given year. It winters primarily on the west coast of South America, from central Peru to northern Chile. Small numbers also winter on interior lakes in northern Argentina, and a few have even reached the Straits of Magellan. Individuals rarely, but regularly winter in North America as well. During spring migration, the great bulk of Franklins enter the United States and South Texas and migrate up through the Great Plains region. They can be found in a wide variety of habitats. Flooded fields, ponds, and reservoirs are favored resting and feeding sites. The fall route is much the same as the spring route, but the pace of southward migration is more relaxed, and numbers will remain for long periods of time at favored locations. During autumn migration around the Great Lakes, they can sometimes gather in the flocks of Bonaparte's gulls, and can remain at specific sites for as long as the bonies do. Numbers remain at northerly latitudes well into the fall, with individuals still passing through into December. Given their highly migratory nature, it is hardly surprising that the actual migration is far broader than just Texas and the Great Plains. They are found at least rarely throughout North America, from coast to coast in both spring and fall, and the species is casual as far north as Alaska. Farther afield, there are close to 50 records for the western Palearctic, and these records are from as far east as Scandinavia and the Netherlands. It is also recorded from Africa and in the Pacific from as far west as Australia, where there are about 10 records. There is also a site record from the Indian Ocean. Clearly they can occur on just about any spot on the globe. It is important to stress from the outset that Franklins can most easily be confused with laughing gull, and most of our comparisons will involve these two species. The species share many common characteristics, including a similarly dark slate gray upper surface to the wing. Before getting to the specifics of the individual plumages, I would like to add a useful character that can be used very effectively as a tool for identification, and that is the voice of the two species. The calls of Franklins are considerably higher pitched than those of laughing. Let's listen to some calls of the familiar laughing gull. And now of Franklin's. Franklin's acquires its adult plumage at just over 2 years. Unique with Franklin's is that it has 2 complete molts per year, one during the winter while still on the wintering grounds, and one during the late summer while on the breeding grounds. Within the hooded gulls, Franklin's is of medium size. Note the smaller size compared to this laughing gull standing behind it. Notice too that Franklin's has proportionally shorter legs and is shorter winged, which we can also see on the Franklin's here in flight on the right. The short rounded wings seem incongruous for such a long-distance migrant, but Franklin's gulls often takes insects on the wing, and the additional maneuverability gained by the short rounded wings is critical. The bill of Franklin's is shorter and perhaps slightly stouter than laughing, and shows less of a gonadial angle. This probably contributes to the more petite and round-headed, almost dove-like appearance. Indeed, it is sometimes known on the plain states as the prairie dove. I want to stress up front that in all plumages there is either a complete or mostly complete black hood. If the bird lacks a conspicuous hood, it is not a Franklin's gull. Adult Franklin's has charcoal gray upper parts. As you can see, the gray is considerably darker than either this adult ring-billed gull or this second summer walking in among the Franklin's. These adults are in full basic plumage, yet still have striking hoods. Upon closer inspection, it is really more of a half hood, the forehead and lores being whitish. The hood does extend conspicuously up over the crown. On all basic plumage laughings, particularly on second winter birds and on winter adults, the hood is less striking and does not extend solidly up over the crown. Notice too on Franklins the sharp contrast between the dark on the rear of the head with the white nape. Also, the white eye crescents of Franklins are very bold and almost meet at the rear. They are noticeably thicker in all plumages than in laughing gull. One of the reasons they are so much more conspicuous is that the surrounding area is darker. Look at the difference here in the heads of the basic adult Franklins and this winter plumage laughing. This dark postocular area in laughing gull does not cover the eye crescents. Therefore, in winter plumage, the eye crescents of adult or young Franklin's gulls are more noticeable than they are on laughing gulls. The bill is variably blackish, but often can have some dark reddish or orange red at the tip. Like most of the hooded gulls, Franklin's often has a rosy cast to its underparts, which is evident in at least fresh breeding and fresh basic plumages. Indeed, the name given to this beautiful gull by Richardson, who named it, was Franklin's rosy gull. The primary tip projection beyond the tail is fairly pronounced, but shorter than that of laughing gull. Notice too that the white tips to the primaries are larger and are visible at greater distances. Notice the very broad white tertial crescent, and also a distinct white scapular crescent. In flight, note the dark gray charcoal upper surface to the wings, with a broad white trailing edge to the inner primaries and the secondaries. The Franklin shows extensive white at the base of each primary, which forms a broad white band separating the gray base from the black subterminal marks on the outer primaries. Notice too the large white terminal spots. P10 often lacks any black subterminal line, instead being largely or completely white for most of the length. There is some individual variation within adults as to how much black is present in the outer primaries, as we can see from these two adults observed here in Colorado. Dwight suggested that this might reflect relative age within the general age class of adults. In flight from below, the distinctive primary tip pattern is still visible. Particularly distinctive is the much paler undersurface to the primaries. Recall that laughing gulls show a darkish area to the entire outer half of the underwing. Compare carefully the very different patterns in this remarkable shot of both species together. In flight, notice also that the adult does not have a wholly white tail. Adults have gray central retrices, as we can see in this breeding plumaged adult observed on the Texas coast in early April. In alternate plumage, Franklin's acquires a black hood, which is perhaps slightly blacker than the hood of the laughing gull. The bill is a variable shade of red with an indistinct dark subterminal band. This one is certainly at the brighter end, while this one is probably more typical. The bill darkens as the breeding season progresses. The gape is scarlet in birds in full breeding condition. Juvenile Franklin's gulls have underparts that are entirely white, except for a dusky wash on the sides of the neck, extending across the upper breast in some individuals to form a vague, partial collar. The forehead, lores, chin, throat, and feathering at the bill base are whitish to dusky, but usually paler than that of the crown. The crown and ear coverts are blackish, which give the distinctive half hood that we have already described as characteristic for all plumages of this species. Combined with the paler underparts, the effect is completely different from that of a juvenile laughing gull. The partial white eye ring forming crescents above and below the eyes is usually apparent by 2 weeks of age. The high neck is brownish, and the mantle, scapulars, and most of the secondary coverts, except the graders, which are more grayish, are dark dusky brownish gray with buffy feather fringes. But this brownish color quickly fades to a grayer color, and very early on, the mantle and scapular feathers are molted. The juvenile secondary coverts and tertials are retained, as are the remainder of the wing feathers and the retrices. There is a wide degree of variation of birds seen in late July to at least mid-August. A number are in transition from juvenile to first winter plumage, such as this one observed here in Colorado. Others, such as this one seen on the same day, are much further along towards first winter. By September, the great majority of young birds have already acquired, or mostly acquired, first winter plumage. By now, the mantle and scapulars are uniformly gray, though on a few birds there can be scattered brown shaft streaks on the scapulars. The lesser and median secondary coverts are variably brownish gray, and the tertials have extensive dark centers with broad whitish tips. The visible black primaries are tipped with white. The bill and legs are uniformly black. The hind neck is whitish, but the pattern is variable. Some are paler than others. This one with gray in the center of the nape could be confused with the first winter laughing, but as you can see, the first winter laughing has a much more extensively gray nape, and more extensive gray across the chest. Note that the dark half hood is very distinctive, but be cautious about second alternate laughing gulls that may also have a partial hood. These individuals will have much of the plumage quite worn by summer in comparison to the fresh plumage young franklins. Note that the white eye crescents have thickened a bit from full juvenile plumage and join at the rear. In flight from above, the first winter franklin shows extensive dark on the outer two primaries. The amount of dark decreases to shaft streaks on P8 and P7 and a subterminal dark band on P6 and P5. The secondaries have small blackish centers, but are otherwise largely gray and are prominently tipped with white, as are the inner primaries, and this forms a conspicuous white band on the trailing edge of the wing. First winter laughing shows much darker secondaries, and only the inner four primaries are tipped with white, as opposed to franklins, where all but the outer two primaries are tipped with white. This last feature is obviously difficult to assess. Note also the dark on the alula and the greater and median primary coverts. The secondary coverts are now mainly gray, with just the faintest brownish tinge to the medians and lessers. The forwardmost lesser coverts do contrast a little darker, and this gives a slightly dark leading edge to the wing, a feature that is shared with first winter laughing gull. The tail is whitish gray. Particularly distinctive is the sharply contrasting subterminal black tail band, which does not extend to the outer two tail feathers. It is also slightly thicker in the center. Compare the tail pattern of this first winter franklins to this comparably aged laughing gull, where the tail band is present on all of the tail feathers, or with these two first winter birds. It is certainly one of the key diagnostic features in separating these two species. In flight from below, the underwing linings are mainly white. There is some dusky shading to the greater underwing coverts, and the secondaries are gray with white tips. Note that the underside of the primaries are pale gray at the base and then darken at the tip. The outermost primary is more extensively dark. Now let's compare with first winter laughing, in which the underwings show much more dark blotching. In particular, look at the large dark diagonal bar, which extends from near where the trailing edge of the wing joins the body up into the lesser underwing coverts. The darkness and extent of this bar shows extensive individual variation. On this laughing gull, look also at the blackish to all of the rows of the underwing primary coverts, and the primaries themselves are much more extensively dark. During the winter, the young birds go through a complete molt, and when they return to North America, they look quite different. These birds typically arrive later in the spring than do the adults, a pattern also reflected in some of the long-distance migrant sterna terns. Notice now the uniform gray upper parts. The classic half hood is still present, and on some birds seems to be even more complete than on first winter birds, but it is never solidly black. The bill is also black, except for a fine orange tip. There are noticeable white primary tips. In flight from above, there is a broad white trailing edge to the secondaries and inner primaries. Most of the primaries show rather broad subterminal black marks, with just a very thin white proximal line. The outer primary shows extensive blackish on the outer web, while P9 shows a variable amount on the outer web, sometimes as extensive as P10. There is also some dark in the outer greater primary coverts, and the alula, at least on some birds, such as on this individual. But on this one, the color looks more brownish, and the feathers look worn, which leaves us wondering if perhaps these are retained feathers from the previous winter. Others appear to be much more smoothly gray on the upper surface of the wing. The tail band is now lost, or at best is reduced to a few dark subterminal spots. Instead, the central tail feathers are gray with indistinct darker shafts. Special care needs to be taken not to confuse these individuals with adult or second summer laughing gulls. In addition to the structural characters already discussed that separates all laughing and Franklin's gulls, look for the more conspicuous white tips to the folded primaries. Remember that the hood of these first summer Franklins is never fully complete, unlike adult laughings and alternate plumage. One needs to be careful, though, about molting birds. Also note there is no reddish tinge to the bill, as in an adult laughing. In flight, look for the more extensive dark in the primaries on laughing, which is visible from above and below. During the summer, these birds again go through a complete molt, and by the time they are ready to go south, they are in second winter plumage. These individuals now much more closely resemble the adult. Black on the outer web is restricted now to P10, but otherwise the wingtips have a similar amount of black to that of first summer birds. More importantly, the proximal area of white is reduced from adult birds, limited to a very thin white line from above. Again, the pattern is more suggestive of laughing. Again, use the more extensive dark in the primaries of laughing, in addition to structural clues. And remember that in fall and winter, no laughing gull has a hood anywhere near as extensive as will all Franklins. When these birds return the following spring, after a complete molt, they will closely resemble the adults and will have a solid and complete hood. But the wingtip pattern is largely unchanged from the previous fall. It is these individuals, with a solid hood, that can most easily be confused with the laughing. In this example, we can see how little white is visible, proximal to the rather extensive black wingtips, and it could easily be confused with the laughing. To avoid being deceived, look carefully for the structural clues that separate these species, as well as the extent of dark in the primaries, remembering that laughing shows more. The extent of variation in second-year birds is not really known, and it could well be that some individuals show a more adult-like wingtip pattern. The Bonaparte's is one of our hooded gulls that reaches adult plumage at just a little over 1 year of age. It is a familiar transient along both coasts and on inland bodies of water. They can be found feeding in the intertidal zones and on mudflats along the coasts in winter, or on our inland lakes. But during the breeding season, they are found around forested lakes and ponds in the boreal and taiga zones from western Alaska east to Hudson Bay. There, they actually nest in conifers. During the migration period, they are perhaps best known from the eastern Great Lakes region. In late fall, huge buildups can be found on Lake Erie and in the Niagara Falls region. These concentrations can number well into the tens of thousands. During mild winters, an all too infrequent occurrence from my California perspective, large numbers of almost exclusively adults will remain through the winter. But in most years, there is a mass exodus south and southeast from these areas when the first Arctic blast of frigid weather occurs in late December or early January. The regular winter range includes the Atlantic coast from the mid-Atlantic region south and along the Gulf Coast. They also occur in large numbers on interior bodies of water in the southern states, but are quite local in the Pacific Northwest. Small numbers can winter in the interior of the Southwest, on large bodies of water, but well away from the coast, they are known mainly as rather uncommon spring and fall migrants. They winter south to northern Mexico. Farther afield, the Bonaparte's has occurred casually south to Middle America and the West Indies, and it is casual to the western Palearctic, where it is now recorded annually in the British Isles. The Bonaparte's is one of our smallest gulls. It is only about 80% of the length of a laughing gull. You can see the size difference as well, as this Franklin's gull and Bonaparte swim together, side by side. It has a delicate appearance, and flies with rapid wing beats, more so than Franklin's, and particularly laughing. Many have compared its appearance and behavior to terns. Some even dive, and sometimes fully submerge themselves to catch minnows. Unless you live on the Gulf or Atlantic coast, or on the Great Plains, this is the small gull that you will see the most of, and it is essential that you learn this species thoroughly. It will greatly facilitate locating a rarer species amongst the hordes of Bonaparte's. It can hardly be confused with laughing or Franklin's gulls because of the pale upper parts. In addition to the striking plumage features, listen to the raspy, buzzy calls, which are so typical of Bonaparte's. Bonaparte's has a very slender and petite-looking bill that is entirely blackish in nearly all individuals. But a very few can show a bit of reddish at the base of the bill, as we can see in this individual. Notice, though, how it blends with the rest of the bill, and the reddish is never as prominent or as contrasting as in basic plumage black-headed gulls, which we will discuss next. The adult Bonaparte's in basic plumage has a white head with a small slaty black crescent in front of the eye and a large slaty black patch on the ear coverts. There are two pale gray patches on the head that bridge the crown from eye to eye and ear to ear. This is a much different appearance than the dark half hood of the Franklin's gull. Notice how the half hood immediately differentiates this Franklin's from the three paler-headed Bonapartes. The nape, upper parts, and sides of the breast are a pale gray color, and note how it contrasts a little darker to the remainder of the white head. On the folded wing, note the distinctive black primary tips. This is a key feature from the adult little gull that we will discuss later. The legs and feet of a basic adult Bonapartes are fleshy pink. In flight, perhaps the most distinguishing feature is the brilliant white wedge on the outer primaries, which contrasts sharply to the remainder of the darker and grayer upper surface to the wing. It is the outstanding field character when the bird is in flight and can be seen at great distances. Note the black trailing edge, which is caused by the black tips to the primaries, and it is visible in flight from both above and below. These black tips are what created the black wingtips on the folded wing. In flight from below, note also that the remainder of the underwing is pale, including the primaries. This is the best feature to separate from black-headed, which we will be discussing next. Adult Bonaparte's gulls obtain a blackish head with a distinct grayish cast in March or April. The acquisition of the head color occurs later than adult laughing gulls, and for that matter, most black-headed gulls. Notice the white line, which extends from the top of the eye and around the rear to the bottom of the eye. It does not create the crescent effect present in laughing and Franklin's gull. The hind neck is white, as opposed to pale gray. As the adult comes into alternate plumage, the legs begin to brighten and turn more orange, as we can see from this bird in mid-March. Note the difference in leg color from the first winter bird. On a few individuals in high alternate plumage, the underparts can be flushed with a slight rosy tint, though personally I have yet to see such a bird. It is interesting to note that every year during the winter period in the Great Lakes, a few adults are found with a partial, or even more commonly, a full solid hood. These individuals appear in fresh plumage, but it is unknown when the hood was reacquired, or even if it was ever lost. The juvenile plumage is strongly washed with brown on the cap, mantle, scapulars, and on the sides of the breast. Notice there is a bit of pale at the base of the bill. Although it is retained through the summer into early fall, the brown fades through wear and feather replacement. This is not a particularly familiar plumage to North American observers. Yet annually, juvenile plumage birds turn up in the Maritimes, New England, and the Great Lakes, and occasionally elsewhere, along with adults around the end of July or early August. Yet by the end of August, these juveniles have seemingly vanished, along with most of the adults. When the next influx of Bonapartes appear much later, typically late in October, the young birds are now in first basic plumage. Now, the forehead, lores, and most of the sides of the head are white like an adult. Note the prominent blackish postocular spot and the gray wash on the nape and sides of the breast that blends into the back. Particularly obvious on the folded wing is the extensive blackish brown in the lesser coverts and in the center of the tertials. This is the best way to readily age birds when they are at rest. The legs and feet are a pale fleshy pink, similar to the adults, but average paler. In flight from above, again the blackish brown in the lesser secondary coverts is extremely obvious and forms a dark carpal bar. This is very different from the upper wing pattern of young laughing and Franklin's gulls. Note, though, the individual variation from bird to bird. It is always present, but some, such as this one from Niagara Falls, show a stronger carpal bar. Note also the blackish in the secondaries, which forms a secondary bar, and in the ulula, median, and greater primary coverts. When we look at these greater primary coverts carefully, note that the outer greater primary coverts are mainly blackish, but the inner ones are mainly gray. This is a subtle but important difference from the first winter black-headed gull. There is also black in the outer webs of the outer three primaries, but the white wedge that was so distinctive on the adults is equally useful here. And note that, like the adults, the primaries are extensively edged with black. At close range, note that there are small white tips on all but the outer two primaries. In flight from below, the underwings are mainly white, but with a complete and rather narrow black trailing edge. The other easy way to distinguish first winter birds from adults is the prominent black subterminal band, the individual feathers being very narrowly tipped with white. Though the band is complete, unlike Franklin's, the outer tail feathers show only a small subterminal black spot, as we can see when we return to that outstanding shot of this first winter Bonaparte's. By first spring, the immatures sometimes acquire a partial blackish-gray hood, which on occasion can be rather complete, but never solid. By spring, the white primary and tail tips have often worn off, and sometimes the central tail feathers are replaced by white feathers, which break up the tail band. The molt to adult occurs in summer, and by mid-August the birds have largely, or almost entirely acquired adult basic plumage, though a few may retain traces of black in the tail and have black shaft streaks in the primary coverts. This is probably the most abundant gull in the Palearctic, if not the world. It is a widespread breeder across Europe and northern Asia. It winters over much of the breeding range, at least in Europe and Scandinavia. But they also winter in numbers south to equatorial West and East Africa and over much of Southeast Asia. In North America, it is best known from northeastern North America, particularly from Newfoundland, where it is rather common in winter, with daily counts approaching or even exceeding 100 individuals. In fact, Newfoundland and Quebec harbor the only known breeding colonies of black-headed gulls in North America. There are currently 3 locations in northern Newfoundland and 2 in Quebec. In Newfoundland, Bonaparte's is quite scarce at any time of the year, but it is important to stress that in the coastal Maritimes and New England, where Bonaparte's is common during migration, the few hooded gulls that remain in winter are often black-headed. Despite this, in most of North America, black-headeds are to be looked for in the large flocks of Bonaparte's gulls in migration. Outside of the Northeast, very small numbers occur elsewhere down the Atlantic coast, and occur casually to Florida, Bermuda, and the Bahamas. They are also noted very rarely on the Great Lakes. It is casual elsewhere in eastern North America and the Great Plains states. In the West, small numbers occur regularly in western Alaska in migration. Elsewhere on the West Coast, it is very rare, but of annual occurrence. Within the hooded gulls that occur in North America, only laughing is larger. Black-headed can be easily separated from that species, and the smaller Franklin's, by amongst other features, the very pale gray rather than charcoal gray upper surface to the wing. Within North America, the confusion species is clearly Bonaparte's, and we will confine almost all of our comparisons to that species. For starters, the black-headed is certainly larger than Bonaparte's. Look at this standing black-headed surrounded by Bonaparte's in Santa Barbara, California, or of this second Colorado record at Union Reservoir. In addition to the size, there are some other things we can see that are characteristic in all plumages. The black-headed has a longer and stouter bill that is reddish at the base and has longer and redder legs. Also characteristic in basic plumage is the slightly paler coloration to the head, nape, and mantle. The calls of black-headed are a little more raucous, less buzzy than Bonaparte's, as we can hear in these comparisons. Black-headed. Bonaparte's. Some calls of black-headed are almost corvid-like. The adult and basic plumage has a very similar head pattern to a winter Bonaparte's. It shares with that species the gray or slate-colored patch on the ear coverts, the dark crescent in front of the eye, and the pale gray bands across the head from eye to eye and ear to ear. But note that the crown, nape, and sides of the breast are paler, not as gray as Bonaparte's, and this paler coloration continues on through the mantle. We can see this subtle yet important shading difference clearly in these 2 adults sitting side by side. It is a distinction that applies to winter immatures too. Particularly distinctive is the stouter bill, which is a rather bright shade of red with a black tip, and this color can be noted at even moderate distances. It is certainly strikingly different from the slender black bill of Bonaparte's. Note again the longer, stouter, and redder legs. The black primary tips on the folded wing appear pretty much the same as Bonaparte's. In flight, the best distinguishing feature from Bonaparte's is the largely dark inner webs to the outer primaries. This forms a solid dark patch on the underwings, and when you are scanning a large flock of flying Bonapartes, this is the feature that is going to jump out at you amongst the flying mass. When we take a closer look, we can see that P10 is mainly whitish, except along the innermost edge. The dark shading then includes the inner webs of P9 through P4. Otherwise, the underwing is similar to Bonaparte's, with blackish tips to the outer primaries, and the wing linings, inner primaries, and secondaries being whitish. The upper wings are very similar to Bonaparte's, except for the slightly paler surface to the upper wings, resulting in slightly less contrast with the white patch on the outer primaries. Note again the black tips to the outer primaries. Overall, the wings of Black-headed appear proportionally broader than Bonaparte's. Also, note that the flight is a little more relaxed, less frenetic, and tern-like than Bonaparte's. In alternate plumage, the Black-headed acquires a dark hood, but the timing of this molt is quite variable. A few have acquired the hood by even late December, and particularly January, such as some of these birds in France in mid-month, while others still lack the hood in March. Probably some populations, particularly those from the northern end of the breeding range, acquire their breeding plumage later, but we are not aware of any published studies indicating this. Recall that Bonapartes don't even begin to acquire their hoods until March, usually late March, so seeing birds that have a hood, or acquiring a hood by midwinter, can be a good clue between Black-headed and Bonapartes. But beware of the very few adult Bonapartes that show a hood in even the early winter months. The breeding adult Black-headed has a blackish-brown hood. Grant indicates the hood is more blackish soon after it is acquired, but quickly through wear acquires more of a brownish cast. Note the legs and bill are now much darker than in winter. On this individual photographed at Gamble on St. Lawrence Island, Alaska, the bill essentially appears black. On others, the bill appears more of a dark red color. The white eye ring that encircles the rear of the eye, but not the front, is like that of Bonaparte's. A few black-headed gulls can show a pinkish tinge to the underparts in alternate plumage, but as with Bonaparte's, it is definitely not the norm. By August, they are molting back into basic plumage. The juvenile plumage is rarely seen in North America outside of Newfoundland, where small numbers breed. As with the juvenile plumage Bonaparte's, it is extensively washed and mottled with cinnamon or buffy brown. This plumage is held only briefly and is usually seen on or near the breeding grounds. This individual, observed in England in the first week of September, is typical of many young black-headed gulls seen in late summer in Europe away from the breeding grounds, in that it is already molting to first winter plumage. By fall, first winter plumage is acquired, though sometimes a few juvenile feathers can be retained. At rest, the bird now looks much more like an adult, the main difference being the mottled brown wing coverts and the extensively dark-centered tertials. Note again the pink, or pinkish-orange-based bill, which immediately separates it from the Bonaparte's gull, which has a dark and more slender bill. And of course, the large body size is also very helpful in picking out the rare black-headed. In flight, the first winter wing pattern is more fully visible. The dark feathering, visible on the lower rows of lesser coverts and on the median coverts, forms a moderate dark bar, and there is also some dark on the median and greater primary coverts, as well as on the secondaries and inner primaries. Note also the distinct dark tail band. As in other plumages, the key confusion species is Bonaparte's, which it closely resembles. In addition to the overall size, bill color, and structural features we have already discussed, there are differences in the upper wing pattern. The subterminal dark trailing edge of the primaries averages broader on black-headed, and the terminal white spots are smaller. The carpal bar, on the other hand, is on average not as dark and as contrasty as it is on Bonaparte's. Recall on Bonaparte's, the outer greater primary coverts show a good deal of dark, while the inners are pale. As we can see on this first winter black-headed, the reverse is true, in that the outers are essentially pale, and the inners show some dark. This mark is carefully detailed by Grant. As with the adult, the entire upper surface to the wing is a little paler gray, and the underparts are whiter. On Bonaparte's, the shade of gray is a little darker, which creates more contrast with the white wedge in the primaries. The gray also spills over a bit onto the sides of the breast. We can see this subtle, yet important shading difference in our split screen comparison in these birds. One additional minor point is that young black-headed gulls average a little less dark on the outer tail feather than Bonapartes. In flight from below, the primary distinguishing feature from Bonapartes is again the dark shading on the outer primaries, which is characteristic of the adult. The degree of darkness, though, is variable, but on average seems paler than the adult. It is still the best feature to look for when you're able to view a bird from this angle. By first summer, the brown areas on the wing are less evident, though the tail band remains. There is a good deal of individual variation in terms of how complete the dark hood is. On some individuals, there is little difference from first winter, while on others, such as this individual from England in April, the hood is almost complete, with just some indistinct whitish mottling on the forehead. Grant's field work from southeast England indicates that nearly 2/3 showed complete or mostly complete hoods. Perhaps those that near or actually reach the breeding grounds acquire a more complete black head than those that summer further south. The bill color on first summer birds is similarly variable, but on many it is overall darker than first winter, as we can see here on our April English bird. By second winter, adult plumage is essentially acquired, which fits the aging chronology of most of these hooded gulls. The little gull is the smallest and one of the world's most beautiful gulls. Its primary range is the Palearctic, where its distribution is somewhat patchy. In North America, it has become a regular visitor to the east. Here, very small numbers breed irregularly in the Great Lakes region. Perhaps many more breed much farther to the north, around James and southern Hudson Bays, though specific breeding records are few in this vast and underbirded region. Little gulls are frequently seen in migration in the Great Lakes region, where small numbers linger into the early winter until freeze-up. In midwinter, they are primarily known from along the east coast, but are also casually noted from the southern U.S. In the western U.S., it is strictly casual, though some individuals in California and Washington have returned annually for a number of consecutive winters. Here in North America, little gulls are nearly always found accompanying the far more abundant Bonapartes. So the main challenge is being able to pick one out amongst hundreds or even thousands of that more numerous species. We are here at the Niagara Escarpment region, one of the East's most beautiful natural wonders. Newlyweds may come here to Niagara Falls for their honeymoons, but birders travel here in late fall for the annual congregation of tens of thousands of gulls, including thousands of Bonapartes and small numbers of little gulls. Numbers vary year to year, but can exceed double figures in a day. There are other places in the late fall that get decent numbers of little gulls, notably the Rochester, New York area and Long Point, Ontario. Still, Niagara is the best-known location. In addition to the late fall, early winter period, numbers of little gulls can also be seen here in the early spring on the northbound migration. In addition to the small size, adult little gulls have slightly more rounded wingtips than do the other small hooded gulls, particularly Bonapartes, which appears quite pointed-winged. However, this is much less evident on first-year little gulls, which have more pointed primaries. Little gulls seem to have a slightly more fluttery, or even moth-like flight than Bonapartes, and are extremely agile and acrobatic. They feed by picking food off the water surface while in flight. They do not dive into the water as Bonapartes and black-headed will often do. They have a rather short, thin black bill and short legs, which we can see on this breeding plumaged adult here, standing next to the comparably plumaged Bonapartes gulls at Churchill. We have noted that the legs are often difficult to see on the flying bird, which is how most little gulls are viewed in North America. We will begin then with identifying birds in flight, the primary challenge just being able to pick them out from the mass of Bonapartes. Other than the small size, what to look for depends entirely on the age. We'll start with the basic adult. By far the best feature is the blackish underwing. This includes most of the primaries and secondaries, and to a variable extent the wing linings as well. On some individuals, the underwing coverts are nearly as dark as the primaries and secondaries, while others are paler here and show more contrast. We will discuss this variation in more detail shortly. Variation aside, the blackish underwing is quite noticeable at great distances, and is an exceptional field character in picking out an adult from a flock of several thousand Bonapartes gulls. From above, the upper surface to the wing is a uniform pale gray, except for prominent white tips to the primaries and secondaries, which forms a conspicuous white trailing edge, visible from both above and below. The upper surface to the wing is also a bit paler than that of Bonaparte's, and there is no white wedge visible on the upper surface of the primaries. The prominent black subterminal primary band, visible on no species, is lacking in little. This lack of black on the folded primaries is the single best feature to look for when trying to pick out a little amongst many sitting Bonapartes. While at rest, another good feature for separating little is the much darker solid gray patch on the crown, which is usually separated from the postocular spot and the small dark eye crescent by a white supercilium. On some, such as this individual in France, the dark crown and postocular spot can be connected. On all plumages of Bonapartes and black-headed, except juvenile, the crown is much paler. Further, on those species the crown markings are separated from each other. Note again the shorter legs and smaller size of the little gull in comparison to these Bonapartes. The mantle is a paler gray than on bony, and similar in shade to that of black-headed. The hind neck and sides of the chest are the same gray color as the mantle. The legs and feet are brownish pink or dark flesh, and the bill is black. In breeding plumage, adults acquire a jet black hood, which is much darker and more extensive than that in either Bonapartes or black-headed. This individual, observed in England in late March, has largely acquired its black head. Notice that the white eye crescents, present in the previous 4 hooded gulls, are conspicuously absent. The legs turn a bright red, and the bill is now a dull dark red, though it still can appear blackish at any distance. Adult little gulls, particularly those in breeding plumage, often have a slight rosy suffusion on the breast. These rosy tints are more unusual in Bonapartes and black-headed. Listen to these little gulls as they call almost continuously while feeding over a marsh in northwest England. It's a soft kick-a, and different enough from the querulous, louder chattering call of Bonapartes to be useful in the field. Let's listen again. Little gull, Bonapartes. The juvenile plumage little gull is very distinctive, yet not frequently encountered in North America away from breeding areas. Having said this, full juvenile plumage birds have been encountered from such distant locations as Southern California, 2,000 or more miles away from the closest known nesting locations. This bird in almost full juvenile plumage turned up in Colorado in the middle of September. Particularly striking is the blackish crown and mantle, and this color spills over onto the sides of the breast. The scapulars are also extensively blackish, with prominent whitish fringing. This fringing is more of a yellow-buff color when extremely fresh. The upper wing pattern is quite distinctive, but it is retained through first winter, and we will discuss it under that age class. Later in the fall, first winter plumage is acquired. The mantle, scapulars, and breast sides are now pale gray. Birds of this age show a broad and obvious dark M on the upper surface of the wing. This is caused by extensive blackish on the rear rows of the lesser and median secondary coverts, the alula, nearly the entire median and greater primary coverts, and the outer webs of the primaries. The marginal coverts are gray. This dark M is diagnostic of little gull and eliminates Bonapartes and black-headed. But beware of those young Bonapartes with abnormally dark upper wing coverts, which can suggest a little gull-like pattern. This oddly plumaged and strongly marked first winter Bonapartes was observed on the first day of November. More likely, confusion species include first winter kittiwakes and Rosses, all of which share the bold dark M. We will discuss separation of those species later on in the video. Some individuals retain, at least for a time, black back feathering, which connects neatly to the black carpal mark we have just described and forms a continuous black bar across the entire upper wing. Note at this age the underwings are pale, quite unlike the adult pattern. As with the young of the other hooded gulls, first winter little gulls show a distinctive dark subterminal tail band. On some individuals the outer tail feathers can be entirely white. At rest, the much greater extent of blackish on the upper wing coverts is readily visible on the folded wing, and this will be the best clue in picking them out amongst the larger Bonapartes. In this split screen example, We can compare the amount of blackish on this little, first with a typical bony, and next with this strongly patterned Bonaparte's. Note again the distinctive head pattern we discussed under the adult, which is also useful in telling first winter birds from the paler-headed Bonaparte's and black-headeds. First winter birds have black bills, and the legs are pinkish flesh. By spring, a partial hood can be acquired. During the course of the late spring and summer, molt progresses to a second winter plumage. The all-white tail is rather quickly acquired, while the change on the wing is more gradual. This first summer bird observed in early April still shows the black tail band and a strongly marked dark M. The M is gradually lost while the underwing darkens. Obviously, this blend of features can produce some interesting plumages, such as this early August bird from Crowley Lake, California, which shows a rather strong white bar on the otherwise rather dark underwing. By fall, second winter plumage is acquired, and here there is a matter of some debate and uncertainty. Some individuals show dark marks of variable extent on a variable number of outer primaries. A few show very small dark marks on the outer greater coverts, and a lula as well. Birds with darker markings on these feather groups also have paler wing linings. Most agree that birds that have these features are second winter birds. Grant has speculated further that individuals with an adult upper wing but paler wing linings are also second winter birds. On the other hand, we have watched known individuals molt from first summer plumage to full adult, with no dusky markings above and having very dark underwing linings as well. In any event, birds with pale wing linings and these upper wing marks are observed into the following summer, as we can see on this individual in June from Churchill. Note that the head is now solidly black, just like a full adult. This nearly whole Arctic breeder is certainly one of our most beautiful gulls. Although nesting on the Arctic tundra, it spends most of its life at sea, where it is certainly our most pelagic gull. It winters primarily off the west coast of South America and off South Africa. A few, even hundreds at times, winter north to off southern Baja California. But north of Mexico, the species is strictly accidental in midwinter, with virtually no documented records after December. Within North America, the species is probably best known from pelagic trips off the west coast, where small numbers, to even hundreds, can be seen daily in May, and then even more commonly from August through October. A few lingering through November, and even casually into December, such as this tardy individual at Niagara Falls, swimming with Bonaparte's. Careful searching of interior bodies of water in fall in North America has revealed that very small numbers migrate through this region, east as far as the Great Lakes area. Indeed, the species is decidedly more frequent anywhere in the Midwest than along or even off the East Coast. Even though numbers can be found in the eastern Atlantic during migration, it just avoids the western Atlantic. Similarly, it is almost unknown in the western Pacific. It is casual anywhere in the interior of North America in spring. Sabins is our third smallest gull, being only slightly smaller than Bonaparte's, but having proportionately longer wings. Sabins has a molt sequence that differs from our other northern gulls. For adults, a complete pre-basic molt begins soon after arrival on the winter grounds. This is followed by only a partial pre-alternate molt early the following spring, before they migrate north. Pre-basic molt in juveniles also begins on the wintering grounds, but may not commence as soon after arrival, since they will not be returning to the breeding grounds the following spring. The flight of Sabins is buoyant, almost tern-like, the jizz being appreciably different from the larger black-legged kittiwake, which is also highly pelagic and can be confused with Sabins, particularly at a distance. Birds in all plumages have a diagnostic pattern of black outer primaries, with white terminal spots contrasting sharply with white on the inner primaries, all but the innermost secondaries and the outer greater coverts. The remaining upper wing coverts and the mantle vary from gray to grayish-brown, depending on the age. The whole effect creates a striking pattern of dark and light triangles and readily identifies the species. Sabins has a forked tail, although when fully spread, this effect is lost. since adults in our part of the world will nearly always be in complete or largely complete breeding plumage. Let's start by looking more carefully at these stunning birds foraging on the shoreline at Safety Lagoon near Nome, Alaska. Note the distinctive slate-gray hood, which is completely encircled by a sharply defined black collar. The width of this collar can change depending on the posture of the neck. This contrasts sharply with the white hind neck. At close range, a red orbital ring can be seen, and if you are fortunate, you might even be able to view the red mouth lining that further adds to this bird's stunning appearance. We can also hear the raspy calls, which differ slightly from Bonaparte's. The black bill with a very clear-cut yellow tip is also striking when adults are at all close, which is certainly the case here. The legs are black. The upper parts are a medium shade of gray, a bit darker than a Bonaparte's. In addition to the black, gray, and white triangles, note the prominent white tips to the outer 5 primaries. And look how far the primaries extend beyond the tail. Below, the underparts are white, but some show a pinkish tinge. In flight, it is hard to get past the upper wing pattern, but let's just take a second to look at the pattern from below. The white wing linings and triangularly shaped white trailing edge contrast paler to the grayer greater wing coverts. The underside of the primaries are also shaded with darker gray. In summary, a Sabins in this plumage is about as close as it comes to having an unmistakable gull. In winter plumage, the adults lose the gray hood and instead have variable slaty gray smudging about the nape and rear of the crown. Some have a fairly prominent nuchal collar. The white primary spots have often worn off. Keep in mind that we don't see Sabins in winter, and even those birds seen in late fall are invariably juveniles. Otherwise, winter adults closely resemble breeding plumage adults, though Grant found that some acquire flesh-colored or even reddish legs. Certainly some presumed fall adults show whitish flecking on the head, and this can be seen on some spring birds too, like this one here in Nome. Whether this reflects some undescribed variation in the timing of head molt in adults, or perhaps reflects an advanced first summer plumage, or less likely an undescribed second summer plumage, is somewhat conjectural. The juvenile Sabins is a uniform gray-brown from the top of the crown back through the hind neck, mantle, and upper wing coverts. The color also extends well over to the sides of the neck and breast, again a distinctive pattern. The forehead is whitish, as are the lores, and much of the underparts. There is no real hooded effect to the head. There is a black triangular spot in front of the eye, and white narrowly extends back to and around and under the eye. The auriculars can be a little darker brown than the rest of the head on some individuals, but not others. The pattern above is rather intricate. Note that each feather has a darker subterminal edge with a paler fringe. This gives the upper parts a scaly appearance. There is some slight variation in the overall color of the upper parts. On some the color appears somewhat more brownish, while on others the gray tone predominates. No doubt lighting conditions are a factor as well. At rest, the blackish on the primaries contrasts darker to the rest of the upper surface of the wing. Note the pale tips to the primaries, particularly on P8 and P7. Also, one can see a white crescent formed by the exposed fringes of the lower 2 tertials. The juvenile has an entirely black bill and grayish-pink legs. In flight, the pattern is again very distinct, just as in the adults, except that the mantle and most of the secondary coverts are grayish-brown rather than gray. Here now we can see that Sabins has a black subterminal tail band, broader in the middle, with a narrow whitish terminal fringe. The underwing shows the same pattern of dark and light contrasts we saw earlier on the adult. In summary, the juvenile Sabins is pretty unmistakable in flight. When sitting, they can certainly look unfamiliar to an observer, but then they aren't apt to be confused with anything else. Notice again the dorsal grayish-brown color and scaly pattern, and the lack of a dark hood, or even well-defined head spots. Once the winter grounds are reached, a complete molt produces first winter plumage. Again, this is not a plumage that is at all familiar to North American observers. This remarkable individual actually spent the winter in northern Ohio on Lake Erie and remained through the following spring and summer. It is perhaps the only well-documented winter record for either the United States or Canada. First winter birds resemble juveniles, but note that the mantle, scapulars, and some of the inner secondary coverts are now gray. The grayish-brown on the nape is now replaced with variable amounts of slaty, producing a nuchal collar, not too unlike immature black-legged kittiwakes, which we will review next. Late in the winter, or during the following spring, a partial molt produces first summer plumage, which is highly variable, though more similar to the adult. These individuals have a slightly more extensive hood, but the grayish slate is still concentrated in the nape region. On a few, a partial hood can be present on the lower edges of the throat. We believe that individuals with solid gray hoods with limited white flecking, such as this bird we looked at earlier, may represent older birds. Note too that the yellow bill tip isn't quite as obvious, perhaps again representing less than a full adult bird. Most first summer birds have acquired a yellow bill tip, though it often isn't as extensive or as contrasty as on older birds. Leg color is apparently variable. Some can be blackish. Our examples of this first summer bird was of the Ohio individual we looked at from the previous winter, but this plumage is frequently seen off the west coast from late spring and on into the fall. A complete molt on the winter grounds results in adult basic plumage. Despite the ease in which sabins can be identified, immature kittiwakes are often confused with this species. Within the United States and southern Canada, the timing of their fall movements is quite different. Black-legged kittiwake is a much later migrant, and by the time they arrive, the great majority of sabins are already well south. These mistakes usually involve birds seen at considerable distance. Finally, it should be briefly mentioned that the immature red-legged kittiwake has an even more sabins-like wing pattern, which we will review in detail under that species. Any winter sighting of a sabins off the west coast should be checked carefully for the possibility of a vagrant immature red-legged kittiwake. The black-legged kittiwake is a circumpolar breeder and is one of the world's most abundant gulls, with breeding colonies sometimes numbering more than 10,000 pairs. In North America, it breeds south to the Wolf Islands in southwestern New Brunswick on the Atlantic side, and through the Aleutians and islands in the Gulf of Alaska in the Pacific. Numbers of non-breeding birds can be found well away from the breeding colonies. Given its very northerly distribution, it is hardly surprising that it has been recorded to within 250 miles of the North Pole. In migration in winter, this is primarily a pelagic species, though it can also be seen from shore, and periodic wrecks can bring hundreds of birds to the coast, particularly in late winter. Many of these, especially immatures, can linger for extended periods of time, even into the summer months. The normal winter range extends south to the mid-Atlantic zone and to California. At least on the west coast, the southern limits of the winter range vary greatly from winter to winter. In some winters, moderate numbers winter south to Baja California, while in other winters few reach even northern California. On the Atlantic side, a few winter south to off the east coast of Florida. It is important to emphasize that the majority of the population winters at quite northerly latitudes, even within the breeding range. The species is very rare, but annual in winter on the Gulf Coast. The species is also regular in the interior, particularly on the Great Lakes, where very small numbers are recorded annually. A few are also seen on the larger lakes and major river systems. It is strictly casual in the interior of western North America. The overwhelming majority of these interior occurrences are of first winter birds in late fall. Spring records are exceptional. The black-legged kittiwake is a medium-sized gull with proportionally rather long and narrow wings. Under windy conditions, its flight can sometimes approach that of a shearwater. Here we can see how it is dwarfed by this glaucous-winged gull, yet is considerably larger than this Bonaparte's. Note also the short legs, which are normally black in all ages. We can see the short legs of these two black-legged kittiwakes in comparison to the comparably sized, yet longer-legged mew. The bill is rather long, but thin, and the culmen is distinctly curved. When sitting on the water, the chest seems to sink more in the water, with the wingtips being raised at more of an upward angle, as opposed to these more buoyant, accompanying Bonaparte's gulls. The common name of the black-legged kittiwake is derived from its distinctive calls, which can be loosely interpreted as, "Kittiwake, kittiwake." It is constantly heard on the breeding grounds, but migrants and winter birds are much quieter. They also give other high-pitched cries. As with the little gull, the adult and first winter plumages are radically different from one another. We'll begin by studying breeding plumaged adults. Note the fairly uniform gray coloration to the upper parts, about that of a mew gull, and the wingtips contrast sharply black. The head and underparts are white, and the eye is dark. We can also see a red orbital ring on these breeding plumage birds in Alaska on St. Paul Island in the Pribilofs, where most of our footage of breeding adults was taken. The bill is an unmarked greenish-yellow color. The short legs are nearly always black, as are the feet on adults, though very rare individuals can have colored legs, ranging from yellow to even red. In flight, we can see the wingtip pattern in more detail. The outer primaries are nearly completely black, in the terminal portion with no white mirrors. Many also show no trace of white apical spots, while others can show very small and inconspicuous spots from P6 through P10. Regardless of whether there are these trace spots, the wingtips still have that dipped-in black ink look, the classic field mark that field guides have emphasized for decades. It is also a good field mark in flight. Note that the dorsal surface is not uniformly gray. The mantle and upper wing coverts are a slightly darker color than the primary coverts, secondaries, and the majority of the primaries. This two-toned look to the upper wing is one of the key field marks from red-legged kittiwake, which we will discuss next. The paler coloration to the basal portion of the primaries further enhances the contrast of the black wingtips. The square-cut tail is white. In flight from below, the underwings look essentially pale, except for the black wingtips. The adult and basic plumage closely resembles the breeding adult. The most obvious difference is that there is now a distinct slaty postocular mark, which extends up and over the crown, and there is obvious gray shading in the nape region, which spreads down to the sides of the neck. The juvenile black-legged kittiwake is a very different looking bird from the adult. Particularly striking is the broad and extensive black nuchal collar, the black postocular mark, and the extensive black on the upper wing coverts, which is readily visible on the folded wing, though is even more striking in flight, as we shall soon see. Some individuals show thin black tertial lines, while others have just trace lines, or even none at all. There are no white apical outer primary spots. The bill is black, rather than greenish-yellow. The legs vary from very dark gray to blackish, though infrequently individuals can have colored legs, ranging from yellow to pinkish flesh. In flight, the black nuchal collar and bold black M are strikingly obvious. The tail is slightly forked, and there is a prominent terminal black band, which is broadest in the center. The outer tail feather is usually white, except usually there is a small dark spot on the inner web. As in the young little gull, the black M is caused by the extensively black lesser coverts and intermediate coverts, the alula and the outer primary coverts and primaries. There are some differences in this bar from little. To begin with, it never extends across the back, as is the case in some winter little gulls, which have retained dark juvenile back feathering. Further, the inner greater primary coverts are pale rather than dark, which gives a more symmetrical look to the black on the outer part of the wing. Finally, no little gull has a dark nuchal collar. Of course, the smaller size and the smaller bill of little are also excellent characters. Sabins is a little closer in size, and it is frequently confused with the young black-legged kittiwake, especially those young winter birds that either lack or have a reduced nuchal collar. The problem is particularly acute when either species is seen at a distance. It is important to remember again that Sabins winters well to the south of North American or Palearctic waters, and by the time young kittiwakes are appearing well south, the great majority of Sabins, particularly adults, have departed northern waters. Sabin shows more extensive black on the primary coverts and primaries, and lacks the darker and contrasting bar on the lesser secondary coverts. From below, the underwing is extensively pale, except for the outer webs and tips of the outer primaries. The main difference between juvenile and first winter plumage is the loss of the dark nuchal collar. It is important to emphasize, though, that young kittiwakes migrate well south, retaining their full juvenile plumage. These juvenile plumage birds from Mississippi and southmost Texas are about at the south end of even their extraliminal range. Some individuals retain the nuchal collar well into the winter. Many individuals are seen in a transitional stage where a nuchal collar is evident, though far less obvious than the juveniles we just looked at. There may also be replacement of some of the upper wing coverts, though the carpal bar is still very obvious, particularly in flight. By first summer, the black nuchal collar is now gone, the head and neck pattern now being similar to the winter adult. The wing pattern remains much the same as from the previous winter, except for the emergence of a variable number of gray feathers on the inner wing, and the black areas are now more worn and often appear browner. The bill base is now extensively greenish, though the bill tip often remains black. Again, note the black legs. By second winter, the bird now very closely resembles the winter adult, and perhaps some may not be distinguishable, unless seen at exceedingly close range. Others show trace amounts of black on the upper wing away from the primary tips, and this is carried through to second summer plumage. On this individual, we can see black on the outer webs of P9 and P10, as well as spots of dark on the primary coverts. Note also that the head pattern of this June bird is like a winter adult, which is typical of second summer birds. Aging second summer black-legged kittiwakes may therefore be much easier than picking out second winter birds. This individual is unusual in that there are also trace amounts of black in the tail. The bill color of second-year birds tends not to be quite as intensely colored as adults, and can still show trace amounts of dark. This whole Arctic species is differentiated into two subspecies. Pacific birds of the race Polaricus have a slightly longer and larger bill, and a better developed hind toe than the nominate Atlantic race. These differences would only be evident in the hand. Of all the North American gulls, this is probably the least likely to be found away from its breeding grounds of the Bering Sea region. Here it is known only from 4 locations. Colonies exist on the Pribilof Islands, the Bogoslav Island group in the eastern Aleutians, Bull Deer Island in the western Aleutians, and from Russia on the Commander Islands east of Kamchatka. The Pribilofs remain the most accessible location, and this is where all of our footage was taken. Every year, hundreds of birders come to St. Paul Island in the Pribilofs, and their chief target is the red-legged kittiwake, some of which we have on the cliffs here below us. More than 200,000 pairs breed here in the Pribilofs, over 90% of the world's population. Most of these breed on St. George Island. Here on St. Paul Island, we can see the adults nesting on the cliff faces with other seabirds, but often the best studies come from such locations as the salt lagoon near the village, where a variety of plumages can be seen. Keep in mind that at all of the breeding colonies, the closely related black-legged kittiwake is also found, usually in superior numbers. This offers the visiting birder an excellent point of comparison. In winter, the great majority of the population is believed to exit the Bering Sea region. There are winter sightings from the Gulf of Alaska, and generally speaking, the bulk of the population probably winters in the northmost Pacific. Still, there is much more to learn about their winter distribution. We should state from the outset that we have no winter-taken footage of red-legged kittiwakes. Away from Alaska, where it has been recorded north in the Bering Sea to St. Lawrence Island and the Commander Islands, the species is strictly casual. There is a single old record from the Yukon, Canada, and there are a handful or so of records each from coastal Oregon and from Honshu, Japan. Exceptionally, it has been recorded from Southern California and from Nevada, although the circumstances of the latter record are, to say the least, peculiar. Both of these records involve specimens. Obviously, the main comparison species is the black-legged kittiwake, with which the chronology of plumages is similar. The red-legged kittiwake is noticeably smaller than the black-legged, and has even shorter legs, as we can see here. And except for the rare variant black-legged kittiwakes with colored legs, the red legs of the adult, or orange legs of the immature, are clearly an excellent field mark. Given these variant black-legged kittiwakes, an identification of a red-legged should never be based on this character alone, especially when involving an extraliminal occurrence. Another excellent character of red-legged is the shorter bill, from which the specific epithet of the name is derived, brevirostris. The eye of red-legged is distinctly larger than black-legged, and the forehead shape is steeper. The top of the head, on the other hand, is rather flat. Red-legged shows noticeably longer primary tip projection. The red-legged kittiwake is a strong flyer with frequent, yet rather deep wing strokes, not fluttery or moth-like as in the little gull, or as buoyant as Sabin's. The long series of kittiwake calls are distinctly higher pitched and somewhat squeakier in comparison to black-legged kittiwake. In addition to the structural characters and the red legs, the adult red-legged has a distinctly different wing pattern from black-legged. The mantle and upper surface to the wing is decidedly darker, more of a medium slate color. Particularly distinctive is that it is uniformly dark all the way across to the black primary tips. Recall in black-legged, the paler inner primaries and secondaries contrasted paler to the mantle and secondary coverts. The actual primary tips of red-legged are black, and there are small white subapical spots. From above, the white secondary line is narrower than black-legged, but is much more contrasting. From below, the underwing shows much more dark than the black-legged. The underside of the base of the primaries, the greater underwing coverts, the greater primary coverts, and particularly the median primary coverts, contrast darker gray to the remainder of the underwing coverts. Note how the dark area then continues through the underwing lesser primary coverts and extends partially into the marginal underwing coverts, up and around the bend of the wing. As we can see in these comparative black-leggeds, all of these areas are much more whitish. Also, on the upper wing, the marginal coverts on the red-legged kittiwake are dark gray, unlike the pale leading edge on black-legged. This is a particularly useful mark when the bird is flying at the observer. The darker surface to the wing coverts and the mantle is readily detectable at rest as well, but beware of differing lighting conditions. This character is best used when both species are together and can be compared, as is the case here. As we noted with the larger gulls, birds that sit on ice floes often show deceptively darker mantles. The same applies here to black-legged kittiwake, flocks of which routinely sit on ice, if available. At rest, note again the red legs, which are an intense shade of coral red. I doubt that any variant black-legged could reach this level of brightness. As we have stated, the bill is short and yellow, and the eye is large and dark. There is a narrow scarlet-red orbital ring. We have never observed winter plumage adults, but the literature indicates that the nape region is washed with gray, and there are ill-defined head markings. These are not as contrasting as on black-legged. The bill is now more of a greenish yellow, and the colored orbital ring is lost. All of the criteria mentioned earlier are equally useful in telling winter adults. When seen in flight at a distance, the most discernible features will be the upper and under wing patterns, and if close, certainly the head and bill shape. As a caution, there are other small gulls with variable amounts of dusky on the underwing. These include, but are not limited to, black-headed, adult and second winter little, and Rosses. Rosses also shows a prominent white trailing edge to the secondaries and inner primaries, distinctive of the young red-legged kittiwake, which we will discuss next. The darker upper surface to the wing of the adult red-legged kittiwake is strikingly different from any of those species, as are the dipped-in-ink black wingtips. The larger laughing gull has extensive dark on the underwing and is dark-mantled, but otherwise looks little like a red-legged kittiwake, and obviously these two species have strikingly different distributions. The juvenile and first winter red-legged kittiwake has a very distinctive upper wing pattern. Unfortunately, we don't have any footage until these birds are nearly a year old, when molt to second winter plumage is taking place. This individual, though, still has most of the distinctive first winter wing pattern, with only limited new molt. Note that the secondaries are entirely white, and the inner primaries are also extensively white. The greater secondary coverts are also tipped with white, the outers being extensively white. These white tips form a white line at rest. Keep in mind that the secondaries are hidden on the folded wing, so that the white secondary tips on the adult wing are not visible at rest. In addition to the extensive pattern of white in the upper wing, note the lack of a dark carpal bar that is so distinctive on first-year black-legged kittiwake. Some individuals show trace amounts of dark in the lesser coverts, not even remotely approaching the amount in black-legged kittiwake. In flight from below, the young red-legged kittiwake closely resembles the adult, the primary difference being that the white trailing edge is broader and more extensive. The juvenile red-legged kittiwake has a pure white tail, which is unique amongst juvenile North American gulls. Young black-legged kittiwakes retain black in the tail through at least the entire first winter. The presence of any dark in the tail immediately eliminates red-legged kittiwake from consideration. On these young birds, we can see some blackish on the median and primary coverts, and the blackish in the outer primaries is more extensive than on older birds. Juveniles do have black bills and brownish legs, but as we can see by first summer, the bill is yellow with a black tip, and the legs are an orange-red color. Given the extensive white on the spread wing from above, the young birds are primarily confused with Sabin's gulls, particularly second summer birds or adults that have lost the dark hood. The wing pattern is strikingly similar. When one looks carefully, the pattern of white in the wing is subtly different. Sabin shows more white on the outer secondary coverts, and the inner primary coverts are pure white. These Sabins do have different head markings and a different bill shape and color. Juvenile Sabins have black on the tail and are much more brownish across the secondary coverts in the mantle. Sabin's is proportionally a little longer wing than red-legged kittiwake. As with black-legged kittiwake, perhaps not all second summer red-legged kittiwakes can be told from full adults. But even by the following summer, we can see pretty striking differences from the full adult on at least some individuals. This one in flight has a dark tip bill, and the head patches are more suggestive of a first summer bird rather than an adult. In flight from above, the pattern is now adult-like, but at least on some, there are trace amounts of dark on the tips of the greater and median primary coverts, and the black extends up the outer web of P9, and even a bit on P8 on this individual, in addition to P10. On adults, the black is restricted to the outer web of P10. On these other second summer red-legged kittiwakes, the head is much more adult-like. Note though that the bill is somewhat duller colored, and there is just a hint of a spot near the tip. The leg color of second summer birds is closer to the adult. Since the wing pattern is now adult-like, the white line will not show on the folded wing, as on this first-year bird. No subspecies are recognized, and although they are both closely related to and breed next to black-legged kittiwakes, no hybrids have been documented. A beautiful little gull of the Asian high Arctic, Ross's gull, breeds in northeastern Siberia, mainly between the Kroma and Kolyma rivers, west to the southern Tamaria Peninsula. Very small numbers have also bred at isolated locations in Greenland and Spitsbergen. A few have been found nesting in the Canadian Arctic since the late 1970s, at Bathurst Island and near Churchill, Manitoba. It is highly migratory and begins migrating east from its Siberian breeding grounds in July and August, initially into the northern Chukchi Sea, and subsequently into the western Beaufort Sea off the north coast of Alaska in September, to feed on the rich food source there. They reach the Point Barrow area of Alaska by mid-September, where large numbers concentrate each fall. At times, a large portion of the world's population is believed to be in this area, just east of Point Barrow, and daily sightings have topped 1,000. The birds begin a western retreat in October, which culminates in November. Their wintering range is not as clearly understood, but they migrate south through the western Bering Sea into the western Pacific Basin along both sides of the Kamchatka Peninsula, and from the northern Sea of Okhotsk to the Kuril Islands. It is casual south to Japan. It appears that at least some Siberian birds, instead of migrating east, migrate west into the North Atlantic. In Europe, it is almost an annual winter visitor to the United Kingdom, and has been exceptionally recorded south to Sardinia and the Mediterranean Sea. It is strictly casual south of Alaska and northern Canada, and few birds can match the Ross's gull in providing observer excitement. The first of these vagrant sightings was of a bird that stayed for several months near Newburyport, Massachusetts in early 1975, and was widely trumpeted as the rarity of the century. Nowadays, a bird is seen somewhere every year. The increased records are no doubt due to an increased interest in gull watching, not a change in the distribution. Outside of Alaska, stragglers have occurred in about 17 of the United States and 7 Canadian provinces. This small gull is similar in size to a Bonaparte's, as you can see here, and slightly larger than a little gull. In direct flight, the Ross's gull demonstrates a fast, deep wing beat. When feeding, it has a buoyant flight with noticeably long wings. Food is obtained by hovering above the surface and dropping quickly onto the water, or even plunging tern-like into the water. The most unique structural feature is the wedge-shaped tail, which we can distinguish in flight at considerable distance. When a bird is seen on the water, this tail contributes to the appearance of an attenuated rear end. As you can now see, a Ross's gull will also pick food from the surface like a phalarope. On the ground, its movements are somewhat mourning dove-like. This is the multiple effect of its tiny bill, small domed head, puffy chest, short legs, feathered thighs, and, especially its choppy head-bobbing waddle. Perhaps no other gull is so awe-inspiring as the adult Ross's gull. Summer adults are unmistakable. Look at this stunning bird from Churchill, Manitoba. The diagnostic black neck ring and pink underparts gives the effect of a bird dressed for a White House state dinner. A Ross's gull in adult alternate plumage has a variably intense pink blush to the head, neck, upper mantle, rump, upper tail coverts, and underparts, with the blush most evident on the underparts. While many of our hooded gulls can attain a pinkish blush to their coloration, none approaches the amount of pink of the Ross's gull. The pinkish blush is most obvious in overcast conditions and fades throughout as the feathers wear. The mantle, scapulars, and back are a soft blue-gray that gradually blends into the white on the primary tips. The scapulars are tipped in white, and the tertials are gray. The wing coverts are a pale blue-gray. The legs are bright red. The bill is petite and black. The eye, if well seen, is brown with a red orbital ring. In winter, the adult maintains some of the characteristics of alternate plumage. The black ring around the neck, however, is not retained in winter. The pink tones are less pronounced or absent, but they can still appear quite vivid. The head remains white, with an inconspicuous dark gray or black crescent in front of the eye. The hind crown and pale nape are blue-gray, with a dark gray or black ear spot. This spot is sometimes obscure or absent. Some birds may show dark streaking on the cheek. The legs are now a duller red coloration. In flight, note again the narrow black neck ring of this breeding plumage bird. The trailing edge of the secondaries and inner primaries are broadly edged with white. The outer primaries are mainly gray, but narrowly tipped with white. Thus the entire trailing edge of the wing is white, but it doesn't contrast noticeably against the pale gray. P10 has a black line on the outer edge of the outer web. As we view this bird from below, notice that the underwing coverts, as well as the base of the outer primaries, are gray and give a dusky appearance. This dusky effect may help isolate the highly coveted Ross's gull in a horde of Bonapartes, though there are other rare small gulls that have this feature as well. At a distance, in flight, the Ross's gull resembles little gull. The longer pointed wings and centrally pointed tail feathers are key differences in separating from little gull. Since the wings and tail are proportionally much longer than little gull, when seen on the water, Ross's gulls have an attenuated rear end. In addition to the structural features, adults in winter differ from adult little gull in that they lack a prominent dark cap, and the underwing is dusky gray, but shadow can make it appear blackish, like little gulls. The upper wing has a broad, white trailing edge confined to the secondaries and inner primaries. The secondaries and primaries of a little gull are neatly trimmed in white. The black on the outer web of P10 creates a thin black leading edge to the outer primary, which is not apparent on little gull. Young Ross's gulls are quite different in appearance than adults, as we can immediately see in this juvenile plumage bird from the Yukon. At this age, the upper parts are black or brownish black, with golden feather tips producing a barred effect. A noticeable brown-black crescent is present in front of the eye. The forehead is paler than the crown. By first basic, the bird is paled, particularly on the head, which is predominantly white. A dark eye crescent or smudge is still present. Notice that it is thickest in front of the eye. There is a blackish ear spot. On this individual, some black juvenile feathers have been retained on the hind neck, and this forms a strong nuchal collar, and this one was observed in May. The mantle, scapulars, and upper lesser coverts are pale gray, like the adult. The greater primary coverts are brownish-black, narrowly tipped with white, as are the tertials, and they combine to form a distinct black bar on the folded wing. In flight, first-year Ross's gulls have a striking W pattern across their wings, which is apparent from above. It is formed by the black leading edge of the outer primaries and greater coverts, along with the blackish-brown carpal bar. This blackish W contrasts with the pale gray coverts of the inner wing, and the very pale gray or whitish greater coverts, secondaries, and inner primaries, which taken as a whole forms a large white triangle on the spread wing. When looked at closely, notice that there is a thin subterminal black line near the ends of the primaries. As in the adult, the tail is wedge-shaped, white with a black subterminal area on the elongated tail tip that often forms a triangle. When seen from below, note the dusky shading on the underwing coverts and on the base of the primaries. As with the adult, the first basic Ross's gull also resembles little gull, though the wedge-shaped tail is still a good separating feature, but be wary of molting birds. The black on the outer primaries is less extensive than on a young little gull, and the secondaries are clear white without a dark trailing bar. The tail pattern is similar to little, but the black is more confined to the center, while on little the band is nearly complete. In first summer plumage, the distinct wing pattern may fade, but is still quite visible. The black tail tip is faded, or absent due to wear or the beginning of molt. Most acquire an adult-type neck ring, and at least from our experience, most are every bit as pink-bodied as the adults. The majority of Ross's gulls acquire adult plumage in their second winter. Occasionally, however, individuals in otherwise adult plumage show traces of a carpal bar, dark marks near the tip of the outer two or more primaries, or dusky marks on the innermost secondaries, and such birds can be safely aged as second years. Individuals which retain winter-type head and body plumage in summer may be in second summer plumage. Our last species, ivory gull, is another rarity from the high Arctic. Ghostly white, it is beautiful in its own right, and is highly coveted by birders throughout the world. The bird is a circumpolar breeder in the Arctic Ocean region, where its annual arrivals and departures coincide with the arrival and retreat of the pack ice. In fact, it is rarely found far from drifting pack ice at any time of the year. It breeds on some of the Russian Arctic Ocean islands, Spitsbergen and the vicinity in Arctic Norway, and both the northwest and northeast coasts, as well as locally on the southeast coast of Greenland. In North America, ivory gulls are known to breed in Arctic Canada only on Ellesmere, Devon, Seymour, Baffin, and Pearly Islands. There are no breeding records from Alaska. European Arctic breeding birds, as well as those from Greenland, winter in the northeast Atlantic, just south of the pack ice. They are rare south to Iceland and Scandinavia, and very rare to the UK, where they are recorded annually. Ivory gull is strictly casual on the European continent, where it has been exceptionally recorded as far south as Italy. North American breeders, and probably many from Greenland, winter along the broad stretch of the pack ice edge from the Labrador Sea to the Davis Strait. This area is most likely the main wintering ground in the northwest Atlantic. Further south, ivory gull is somewhat regular on the north shore of the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and more frequent along the nearby southwest coast of Greenland, where it can occur in numbers after a storm. It is extremely rare in Newfoundland, but exceptionally has been seen in numbers. It is casual during winter in the Canadian Maritime provinces, New England, and the northern tier of states, including the Great Lakes region. It is an accidental straggler farther south to Tennessee and Colorado. Ivory gull also winters in the Bering, Chukchi, and perhaps the Beaufort Sea. It is most widely distributed in the Bering Sea, where it winters at the edge and in the leads of pack ice. In fact, perhaps it is best known to North American birders in late spring at Gamble on St. Lawrence Island, at least while there is still floating pack ice near shore. It also winters in the Sea of Okhotsk and is an accidental wanderer south to China and Japan. Each sighting of ivory gull south of its normal winter range is met with great excitement, and rare bird hotlines trumpets its presence when one is found. This beautiful gull is very aggressive and competitive when feeding. At times, it has been seen gorging on blubber so voraciously the plumage becomes blood-spattered. As far back as in Bent's life histories, the description of the ivory gull's fierceness at a feeding site leaves a vivid impression. As you can see, this much larger glaucous gull is apparently content to wait its turn at this carcass till the ivory gull finishes dining. It is always readily approachable, and indeed is drawn to hunting activities in the high Arctic. Yupik Eskimos from Gamble recount numerous stories of ivory gulls milling about the butchering sites. In the mini invasion in Newfoundland in early 1998, most could be approached for close scrutiny. Having a unique opportunity to view these birds at very close range, Bruce McTavish seized it, placing a slab of seal meat on plastic on his legs. It didn't take long before they were climbing on him like happy 4-year-olds on their favorite uncle. For Bruce, it was a white dream. The ivory gull is a medium-sized gull. It is long-winged, and on the folded wings 3 to 4 primary tips project beyond the tail. Sexes are alike, with no pronounced seasonal variation. At all ages, the tibia is fully feathered to the knee joint, perhaps an adaptation to its cold weather environment. Another interesting adaptation to this icy environment are the strongly hooked claws that ivory gulls have. The rounded crown, relatively short legs, and the droopy wingtips projecting beyond the tail all combine to create an ungainly look. When an ivory gull takes to the wing, it is much more elegant. Flight is graceful and powerful. Look at the long pointed wings, which give a profile somewhat similar to the larger ring-billed gull. The legs and feet are often hidden. During competitive encounters, however, the legs are dangled conspicuously. Let's listen for a moment to its call, which is a harsh, disyllabic "here," quite tern-like. As we view this bird feeding on the pack ice at Pond Inlet on Baffin Island, note how the snow-white color of the ivory stands out brilliantly on the Arctic pack ice, and contrasts with the glaucous gull, which, as we know, is the palest of the large gulls. Other than staining, the plumage is entirely white in adults. This is the only pure white gull, except for fully albinistic individuals of other species. The dark brown eye at all ages stands out on the ghostly white rounded head, with a barely noticeable red or vermilion orbital ring. The bill is stout, with an acute upturn to the lower mandible towards the tip. It is mostly bluish, with a green cutting edge and a pale yellow to orange-red tip. In flight, the upper and undersides of the wings are pure white. The dark area under the underwing coverts on this bird is simply a shadow effect brought on by the strong light. The tail appears to be squarer than most gulls, even when spread. When visible, the black legs contrast strikingly with the underparts, even at a distance. In reality, very few species can be confused with this beautiful and striking bird. When faced with an unidentified albino gull, compare the various structural features, such as size, shape, bill, and legs of the species in question. This is an albino Franklin's gull, photographed in Idaho. Superficially, the Franklin's looks rounder and is robust. Closer examination reveals a very short wingtip projection. Remember that the size of the ivory is almost that of a ringbill gull. Some first basic Iceland gulls are particularly pale and could be confused with ivory gull, but Iceland is larger and chunkier and shows some brown or gray mottling, particularly under the tail. Also, the bill is blackish, perhaps with a paler base, and is stouter. This cooperative first winter bird was videotaped in Portsmouth, Maine, and is the individual we will use to describe this age. The most striking feature of this young ivory is the blackish-brown face mask. The bill tip is pinkish towards the tip, shading the bluish horn towards the base. This varies considerably among individuals. Even in this plumage, the body is very white, with variable amounts of black spotting on the mantle, scapulars, and more rarely the breast. Our main bird is more heavily spotted than some. The tertials typically possess prominent subterminal black crescents. There is usually a narrow black subterminal tail band, and varying amounts of small subterminal black spots also on the outer wing, alula, lesser, median, and primary coverts, all of which impart a distinctive ermine appearance. As you watch this individual take flight, notice that all these dark flecks have a distinct pattern. The inner wing has small black spots on the coverts. The majority of individuals in this plumage have spots at least on the outer secondaries. The primaries are tipped with variable black crescents, decreasing in size inwards to small subterminal marks on the inner primaries. The underwing is wholly white, except for the black tips of the primaries and secondaries, and dusky marks on the marginal coverage to the underwing. Notice again the black subterminal bars are crescents on all tail feathers. By the following spring, many of the black tips have disappeared, and the black mask is reduced or lacking, though there is again a good deal of individual variation. For a gull of this size, the ivory attains adult plumage rather quickly. Adult plumage is acquired by the following fall.